Did you know that beneath a quiet hill in Shaanxi province lies an army of thousands, silent, motionless, and waiting for over 2,200 years? Each soldier stands in perfect formation, hand raised as if to grip a weapon long since rotted away. Their faces, no two alike, stare forward with an intensity that transcends death itself. This is the Terracotta Army, and it guards the tomb of the man who first unified China. A ruler so powerful, so feared, that he believed he could command an empire even in the afterlife. But this is merely one chapter in a story that spans more than 4,000 years. A story of dynasties that rose from the Yellow River's fertile plains to command territories larger than the Roman Empire at its height. A story of inventions that would reshape human civilization, paper that carried knowledge across continents, gunpowder that would redraw the boundaries of warfare, printing that democratized information centuries before Gutenberg, and the compass that opened the world's oceans to exploration. This is the story of ancient China, a civilization that built walls reaching thousands of miles to keep out invaders, dug canals longer than the distance from London to Istanbul, and created bureaucracies so sophisticated they would govern hundreds of millions of people. It's a story of brilliant emperors and ruthless tyrants, of philosophical revolutions and devastating rebellions, of golden ages when Chinese cities dwarfed anything in Europe, and of slow declines that would see foreign powers carve up the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. For more than an hour, we will journey together through this extraordinary saga. We'll walk among the Neolithic villages where Chinese civilization first emerged, stand beside the first emperor as he burns books and buries scholars alive, witness the Silk Road caravans carrying Chinese silk to Roman senators, explore the mysteries of underground palaces that remain sealed to this day, and watch as the last dynasty crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions and foreign invasions. What made Chinese civilization so resilient that it survived when Egypt fell to foreign conquest, when Rome collapsed into fragments, when the great civilizations of Mesopotamia faded into desert sands? How did a land of warring kingdoms transform into a unified empire? What secrets lie in the tomb of the first emperor, sealed beneath Mount Li, where rivers of mercury are said to flow according to ancient texts? Why did China, despite technological superiority, eventually fall behind the West? These questions have captivated historians, archaeologists, and sinologists for generations. Tonight, we answer them not with myths or simplified narratives, but with the latest archaeological evidence, primary historical sources, and scholarly debates that continue to reshape our understanding of this ancient world. By the time we reach our journey's end, you will understand how a civilization that gave the world some of its most transformative inventions also became a cautionary tale about isolation and resistance to change. You'll see how the very strengths that allowed Chinese dynasties to endure for millennia, powerful centralized government, sophisticated bureaucracy, Confucian social harmony, eventually became the weaknesses that left China vulnerable to Western imperialism. But we begin, as all great civilizations do, at the beginning. In the mist-shrouded past where history and legend intertwine, where the Yellow River, China's sorrow and lifeblood, first nurtured the communities that would become the Middle Kingdom. If you're ready to explore one of history's most fascinating civilizations in unprecedented depth, to discover stories that will change how you see not just China but the entire arc of human history, then subscribe now. You're about to witness more than an hour of documentary storytelling unlike anything you've experienced before. Each minute reveals new wonders, new mysteries, new insights into a world that shaped our own in ways we're still discovering. Let us begin. The dawn of civilization, Neolithic cultures to the three dynasties. 7,000 years before the first emperor unified China, long before the Great Wall was even conceived, the Yellow River Valley was home to scattered communities of farmers who had only recently abandoned the hunting and gathering lifestyle of their ancestors. These were the Yangshao culture people, and they were laying the foundations for something unprecedented in human history, a civilization that would never truly die. The Yangshao culture, flourishing from approximately 5000 to 3000 BCE, represents the crucial transition from scattered settlements to organized agricultural society. Their distinctive painted pottery, red earthenware decorated with geometric patterns, fish motifs, and human faces, has been excavated from hundreds of sites across the Yellow River Basin. These weren't crude vessels hastily formed. They show remarkable artistic sophistication and suggest a society with time for cultural expression beyond mere survival. At Banpo, near modern Xi'an, archaeologists have uncovered one of the most complete Neolithic villages in China. Here we see the bones of a structured society, a central plaza surrounded by residential houses, kilns for pottery production, a common burial ground, and even a defensive moat. The houses themselves are fascinating. semi-subterranean structures with thatched roofs supported by wooden poles, floors carefully packed and smoothed, hearths for cooking and warmth. But what truly distinguishes Banpo is what it tells us about early Chinese social organization. The dead were buried with pottery vessels containing food and drink for the afterlife. Already 5,000 years before Christ, we see the beginnings of ancestor veneration that would become central to Chinese culture. Children were buried in pottery urns near the houses, suggesting they remained close to the family even in death. Adults were interred in the common cemetery, oriented with heads toward the northwest, following a pattern whose meaning we can only guess at. The Yangshao people cultivated foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, crops native to northern China that could survive in the region's challenging climate. They domesticated pigs and dogs, hunted deer and wild boar, and fished the Yellow River's abundant waters. They made tools from polished stone, bone needles for sewing, and they had already discovered the transformative power of fire to harden clay into permanent form. By 3000 BCE, the Yangshao culture was giving way to the Longshan culture, and with this transition we see society becoming more complex, more stratified, and more technologically advanced. The Longshan people produced pottery of extraordinary refinement, thin-walled black pottery, some pieces no thicker than an eggshell, turned on the potter's wheel with such precision that modern potters struggle to replicate them. But Longshan society also shows us something darker: the beginning of social inequality and organized violence. Excavations reveal fortified settlements with massive stamped earth walls, some reaching 6 meters high and 12 meters thick at the base. Inside these walls, we find clear evidence of social hierarchy: larger houses for elites, smaller ones for commoners, specialized workshops for skilled craftsmen. We also find evidence of ritual violence. At some Longshan sites, archaeologists have discovered sacrificial pits containing headless skeletons, young women buried alive, and oracle bones, animal bones heated and cracked to divine the future. These practices would continue and intensify in the dynasties to come, particularly the Shang, but they begin here in the late Neolithic, as Chinese society transformed from relatively egalitarian villages to stratified chiefdoms competing for resources and power. Around 2070 BCE, according to traditional Chinese chronology, the Xia dynasty was founded by the legendary Emperor Yu the Great. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed the Xia as purely mythological, a creation of later Chinese historians seeking to extend their civilization's pedigree. After all, no contemporary written records of the Xia had been found, and the dynasty's legendary founders, Emperor Yao, Shun, and Yu, seemed too perfect, too virtuous to be real historical figures. But then came Erlitou. In 1959, Chinese archaeologists began excavating a site near the modern town of Erlitou in Hunan province. What they found was stunning: the remains of a large urban center dating to approximately 1900 to 1500 BCE, precisely the period when the Xia dynasty was supposed to have existed. The site features massive palace foundations, bronze weapons and ritual vessels, workshops for producing pottery and stone tools, and a planned urban layout suggesting centralized authority. The debate over whether Erlitou represents the Xia dynasty or perhaps an early Shang city continues among scholars. What's undeniable is that by 1900 BCE, Chinese society had achieved state-level organization, a ruler commanding sufficient power to mobilize labor for massive construction projects, control over bronze metallurgy, a strategic technology of the age, and a hierarchical social structure with distinct classes. The most remarkable find at Erlitou is a bronze foundry containing crucibles, molds and tools for casting bronze vessels. This represents the earliest evidence of bronze metallurgy in China, and it demonstrates sophisticated technical knowledge. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, requires precise control of temperature and metallurgy techniques. The Erlitou bronzes show that Chinese craftsmen had mastered these skills, creating not just weapons but elaborate ritual vessels used in ceremonies to honor ancestors and communicate with the spiritual world. Whether Erlitou is Xia or not, one thing is certain: by the time we reach the verifiable historical record with the Shang dynasty around 1600 BCE, Chinese civilization has all its essential elements in place. Writing, bronze metallurgy, sophisticated urban planning, ancestor worship, ritual sacrifice, social stratification, and a concept of divine kingship, the ruler as intermediary between heaven and earth. The Shang dynasty marks the point where legend becomes history, where archaeological evidence meets written record. In 1899, scholars in Beijing noticed something strange about dragon bones being sold in traditional medicine shops. They were covered with ancient writing. These were oracle bones, and they would revolutionize our understanding of early China. Oracle bone script, the earliest form of Chinese writing we can reliably read, was used by Shang dynasty rulers to communicate with their ancestors and divine the future. The process was elaborate. A question would be carved into a turtle plastron or animal shoulder blade, heat would be applied, and the pattern of cracks would be interpreted as the ancestor's answer. The question, the answer, and sometimes the outcome were all inscribed on the bone. These inscriptions are treasure troves of historical information. They record the names of Shang kings, details of royal hunts, military campaigns, sacrificial rituals, agricultural concerns, illnesses, and even weather patterns. They confirm that the traditional king list for the Shang dynasty, preserved in later texts like Sima Qian Shiji, is substantially accurate, a remarkable validation of Chinese historical memory. Through oracle bones and archaeological excavations at sites like Anyang, the last Shang capital, we can reconstruct Shang society in remarkable detail. At the top stood the king, a figure who was simultaneously political ruler, military commander, and chief priest. His authority derived from his unique ability to communicate with the ancestors and the supreme deity Di or Shangdi. Below the king were layers of nobility, specialist craftsmen, farmers, and at the bottom, slaves, often prisoners of war destined for sacrifice. The Shang capital at Anyang was a wonder of its age. Massive rammed earth walls protected palaces and temple complexes. Royal tombs, some measuring over 300 square meters, were filled with extraordinary wealth, bronze vessels, jade ornaments, weapons, chariots, and the remains of sacrificed humans and animals. The most elaborate tombs contain hundreds of sacrificial victims, eloquent testimony to the Shang elite's power and the value they placed on display in death. Shang bronze working reached heights of artistry rarely equaled in human history. The great ritual vessels, Ding tripods for cooking sacrificial meat, Gui food containers, Ju wine vessels with their distinctive pouring spouts, were not simply functional objects. They were covered with intricate designs, Taotai masks, stylized animal faces, dragons, birds, and geometric patterns cast with precision using sophisticated ceramic piece mold techniques. But the Shang dynasty's reliance on ritual, on elaborate ceremony, on the king's special relationship with the spirit world, would ultimately prove insufficient when challenged by a more pragmatic philosophy from the West. Around 1046 BCE, the Zhou people, originally vassals or allies of the Shang, launched a military campaign that would end Shang rule and establish a dynasty lasting, in name if not in power, for almost 800 years. The Zhou conquest is one of the pivotal moments in Chinese history, not simply because one dynasty replaced another, but because the Zhou introduced a revolutionary concept that would echo through Chinese political philosophy for millennia: the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven was brilliant political theology. It declared that the supreme power in the cosmos, heaven or Tian, granted authority to rule based on virtue, not blood. A virtuous ruler would receive heaven's mandate and enjoy prosperity, good harvests, military success. But if a ruler became corrupt, tyrannical, or incompetent, heaven would withdraw its mandate, signaled by natural disasters, military defeats, and social chaos. At that point, rebellion was not just justified, it was necessary, a response to heaven's will. This concept served multiple purposes for the Zhou. It legitimized their conquest of the Shang. They could claim the Shang kings had lost the mandate through corruption and misrule. It established a principle of governance: rulers must be virtuous to maintain authority. And it created a pattern that would repeat throughout Chinese history. Dynasties would rise, rule effectively for generations, then decay through corruption or incompetence until a new power arose claiming heaven's mandate had shifted. The early Zhou period, particularly the reigns of Kings Wen Wu and the Duke of Zhou, is celebrated in Chinese tradition as a golden age of wise governance. Whether this reputation is entirely deserved or partly idealized by later Confucian scholars is debated, but there's no question the early Zhou established effective systems of control over a vast territory. The Zhou introduced a feudal system, granting lands to relatives and loyal supporters who would govern as vassals, provide military forces when called, and send tribute to the Zhou court. This system worked well initially, creating a network of related ruling families bound by blood, ritual obligation, and mutual interest. But over time, as generations passed and blood ties diluted, these vassal states grew increasingly independent, increasingly powerful, and increasingly willing to challenge Zhou authority. By 771 BCE, barbarian tribes and rebel forces invaded the Zhou capital, killing King Yu and forcing the Zhou court to flee eastward to Luoyang. This marks the transition from the Western Zhou 1046 to 771 BCE, to the Eastern Zhou 770 to 256 BCE, and the beginning of the dynasty's long decline. The Zhou kings would continue to reign from Luoyang, maintaining ritual authority and legitimacy, but real power shifted to the great vassal states. The Eastern Zhou is divided into two periods: the Spring and Autumn period, 770 to 476 BCE, and the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. Despite, or perhaps because of, the political fragmentation and near-constant warfare, these centuries represent one of the most intellectually fertile periods in human history, comparable to classical Greece or the European Enlightenment. During the Spring and Autumn period, dozens of states competed for power, forming alliances, betraying each other, and slowly being absorbed by their more successful neighbors. Warfare became more sophisticated, with larger armies, better weapons, and more complex strategies. The chariot-based aristocratic warfare of the Shang and early Zhou gave way to mass infantry armies of peasant conscripts, fundamentally changing military tactics and social structures. But perhaps more important than the military developments were the philosophical ones. The uncertainty and chaos of the age drove thinkers to question fundamental assumptions about society, governance, ethics, and humanity's place in the cosmos. This was the age of the 100 schools of thought, and the ideas generated during this period would shape Chinese civilization for over 2,000 years. If you're finding this journey through ancient China's foundations fascinating, consider subscribing now. We've barely scratched the surface of this civilization's complexity, and the most dramatic chapters, the unification under the Qin, the mysteries of the first emperor's tomb, China's golden ages and revolutionary inventions, are still ahead. Hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this exploration together. The Warring States and Birth of Empire, Qin unification. The man who would become known to history as Kong Fuzi, Master Kong or Confucius to the Western world, was born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu, during the late Spring and Autumn period. His life coincided with increasing chaos, and his philosophy would be an attempt to restore order by returning to the virtuous governance he believed characterized the early Zhou dynasty. Confucius believed that social harmony could be achieved through proper relationships and ritual propriety. Children should respect parents, subjects should respect rulers, but crucially, rulers should govern virtuously and care for their subjects. His Analects, a collection of sayings and conversations compiled by his disciples, emphasize Rin, benevolence/humaneness, Li, ritual propriety, and Shao, filial piety. He advocated government by moral example rather than force, education to cultivate virtue, and meritocracy in selecting officials. During his lifetime, Confucius was largely unsuccessful. Rulers seeking to conquer their neighbors had little patience for a philosophy that emphasized virtue over power. But his disciples continued his work, and by the Han Dynasty, Confucianism would become the official ideology of the Chinese state, a position it would maintain with some interruptions until 1911. But Confucius was not alone. The Warring States period saw an explosion of competing philosophies, each offering different solutions to the age's problems. Mozi, or Master Mo, advocated a radically different approach. He taught Gen Ai, impartial care or universal love. Where Confucius emphasized hierarchical relationships and greater love for family than strangers, Mozi argued people should love everyone equally. He opposed offensive warfare as wasteful and immoral, promoted meritocracy even more strongly than Confucius, and advocated for pragmatic, utilitarian governance focused on increasing material prosperity and population. The Mahists, Mozi's followers, were remarkable in their own right. They were organized almost like a religious order, living simply, sharing resources, and defending cities under attack with sophisticated siege engines and defensive technologies they themselves had developed. Mahist engineers and craftsmen were renowned for their skills, and Mahist philosophers developed sophisticated logical arguments and proto-scientific methods. Yet despite their influence during the Warring States period, Moism would virtually disappear after the Qin unification, overwhelmed by Confucianism and Taoism. Taoism, associated with the semi-legendary figure Laozi and the historical philosopher Zhuangzi, offered a completely different approach. Where Confucians sought to restore social order through ritual and hierarchy, Taoists questioned whether such order was desirable or even possible. The Tao Te Ching attributed to Laozi advocates Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action, living in harmony with the natural way of things rather than imposing artificial structures. Zhuangzi's writings are full of paradoxes, humor, and stories that undermine conventional assumptions. His most famous parable describes dreaming he was a butterfly, then waking and wondering whether he was a man who dreamed of being a butterfly or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. This wasn't mere wordplay but a profound questioning of how we know reality and whether our categories and distinctions truly reflect the nature of existence. But the philosophy that would prove most immediately influential was also the most ruthless. Legalism. Legalism, particularly as articulated by Han Feizi and practiced by ministers like Shang Yang and Li Si, rejected both Confucian virtue and Taoist spontaneity. Legalists argued that humans are fundamentally self-interested and respond only to rewards and punishments. Therefore, governance should rely not on moral example but on clearly defined laws uniformly and harshly enforced, on a system of mutual surveillance, and on the absolute power of the ruler. Legalism advocated for a strong centralized state with standardized laws, measurements, and writing. It promoted agriculture and warfare while suppressing commerce and intellectual speculation. It encouraged subjects to spy on each other, rewarded denunciations of lawbreakers, and applied collective punishment to discourage deviation. It was, in essence, totalitarianism avant la lettre, and it would be this philosophy that unified China. By the Warring States period, 7 major states dominated what would become China. Qin in the west, Chu in the south, Qi and Yan in the northeast, Han, Zhao, and Wei in the center and north. For 2.5 centuries, these states fought each other relentlessly, forming and breaking alliances, developing increasingly sophisticated military technologies and strategies. The crossbow became widespread, giving even untrained peasant soldiers the ability to kill armored warriors. Iron replaced bronze for weapons and tools, increasing agricultural productivity and military effectiveness. Cavalry emerged as mobile strike forces. Armies grew to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This was total war, and it forged the technologies, organizational methods, and ruthless pragmatism that would ultimately lead to unification. The state of Qin, tucked away in the Wei River Valley in the west, seemed an unlikely candidate for ultimate victory. Its people were considered semi-barbarous by the sophisticated eastern states. But Qin had advantages: defensible geography, good farmland, and starting in 356 BCE, a brilliant and ruthless reformer named Shang Yang. Shang Yang, with the support of Duke Xiao of Qin, implemented radical legalist reforms. He abolished the old aristocratic privileges based on birth, replacing them with a system of ranks awarded strictly for military achievement. Heads taken in battle earned promotion regardless of background. He organized the population into groups of 5 and 10 families who were collectively responsible for each other's behavior and tax payments. He standardized measurements and weights. He promoted agriculture and discouraged commerce. The result was a state that could mobilize its population with unprecedented efficiency. Qin farmers produced surplus grain that fed massive armies. Qin soldiers fought with fanatical intensity, knowing that battlefield success was their only route to advancement. Qin administrators implemented policy uniformly across the state. Qin became a military machine, and one by one the other states fell before it. Shang Yang himself came to a grim end, torn apart by chariots in 338 BCE after accusations of treason. But his reforms outlasted him. By 221 BCE, under King Zheng, who would proclaim himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, the last rival state fell, and for the first time in history, China was unified under a single ruler. The man who unified China was just 38 years old when he completed his conquests, and he would rule for only 11 more years. But in those 11 years, Qin Shi Huang would transform China so fundamentally that his legacy persists to this day 22 centuries later. Qin Shi Huang's vision was nothing less than the complete reformation of Chinese civilization. The old feudal system was abolished entirely. The conquered kingdoms were divided into 36 commanderies, each governed by Qin-appointed officials who could be transferred or dismissed at will. Aristocratic families from the conquered states were forced to relocate to the capital Xianyang, where they could be monitored and prevented from organizing resistance. The first emperor implemented standardization on an unprecedented scale. Writing systems, which had diverged across the warring states, were unified into a single script, the small seal script that would evolve into modern Chinese characters. Weights and measures were standardized, making trade and taxation uniform across the empire. Even the axle width of carts was standardized so they could use the same ruts and roads throughout the realm. But Qin Shi Huang's most famous, and infamous, achievement was the Great Wall. Here we must pause to clarify a common misconception. The Great Wall as we see it today, with its brick and stone construction winding across mountain ridges, was built primarily during the Ming Dynasty, over 1,500 years after Qin Shi Huang. What the first emperor built was far less permanent but no less ambitious: a series of rammed earth fortifications connecting and extending defensive walls built by earlier states. The Qin Wall was built primarily as defense against the Xiongnu, nomadic peoples from the steppes who conducted devastating raids into Chinese territory. Hundreds of thousands of workers, soldiers, peasants, and convicts were conscripted to build the wall under brutal conditions. Many died from exhaustion, disease, or harsh treatment, and their bodies were sometimes incorporated into the wall itself, giving rise to the legend that the wall is built on the bones of workers. The wall ran for thousands of miles, though determining its exact length is complicated by questions of what counts as the wall versus supporting structures, and by centuries of erosion. What's certain is that it represented a massive investment of labor and resources, and that it was only partially effective. The Xiongnu remained a threat for centuries, and determined invaders could find ways through, around, or over the wall. But the Great Wall was only one of the first emperor's massive construction projects. He built a network of roads radiating from the capital, allowing rapid movement of troops and communication. He constructed the Lingxiu Canal, connecting river systems and facilitating trade and troop movements between north and south. And he began construction of his tomb complex, the site that would eventually hold the Terracotta Army. In 1974, farmers digging a well in Shaanxi province struck something hard, the head of a terracotta warrior. What followed was one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Pit by pit, archaeologists uncovered an underground army of over 8,000 life-sized warriors, each individually crafted with unique facial features, hairstyles, and expressions. But the warriors are only part of the complex. There are cavalry horses and chariots, acrobats and musicians, officials and laborers, an entire empire in clay, meant to serve the first emperor in the afterlife. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The warriors were constructed using an assembly line process with standardized parts, yet individualized through careful sculpting of faces and addition of unique details. They were originally painted in bright colors, reds, blues, greens, purples, though the pigments faded rapidly upon exposure to air. The Terracotta Army raises profound questions about ancient Chinese craftsmanship, organization, and belief. How did workshops coordinate the production of so many figures? Where did the clay come from? How were the kilns designed to fire such large pieces? What happened to the weapons the warriors once held? Were they looted or removed for preservation? But the greatest mystery surrounds what the warriors were built to guard: the tomb of Qin Shi Huang himself. According to Sima Qian's Shiji, written a century after the first emperor's death, the tomb chamber is a vast underground palace. The ceiling represents the heavens, with pearls depicting stars and celestial bodies. The floor is a map of the empire, with rivers of mercury flowing mechanically to represent the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Crossbows are rigged to automatically fire at intruders. The emperor's body lies surrounded by vast treasures. When construction was complete, workers who knew the tomb's secrets were sealed inside, and the entrance was buried. Is any of this true? Modern technology suggests it might be. Ground-penetrating radar and soil sampling have revealed elevated mercury levels around the tomb mound, consistent with Sima Qian's description of mercury rivers. Resistivity surveys suggest large underground voids. But the tomb itself remains unexcavated, protected by Chinese authorities who fear the contents could be damaged by exposure to air, as happened with the Terracotta Army's paint. What waits beneath Mountley? Will we ever see the underground palace of Qin Shi Huang? These are questions that continue to captivate archaeologists and the public alike. The tomb holds secrets not just about one emperor, but about Qin craftsmanship, beliefs about the afterlife, and the wealth and organization of China's first unified empire. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before the first emperor could build his eternal palace, he had to secure his terrestrial one, and this required measures that would make him one of history's most controversial figures. In 213 BCE, the Chancellor Li Si proposed that books be burned, all books except those dealing with practical matters like medicine, agriculture, and divination, and those held in the imperial library. The Confucian classics, the historical records of the conquered states, the writings of the 100 schools, all were to be destroyed. The purpose was to prevent scholars from using ancient precedents to criticize current policies. Let the past serve the present, but only as the emperor defined it. The following year, 460 Confucian scholars were reportedly executed, according to some accounts buried alive, for criticizing the emperor and practicing prohibited scholarship. Whether these events happened exactly as described in later sources, written by Confucian scholars with every reason to portray Qin Shi Huang as a tyrant, remains debated. But there's no question that the first emperor suppressed dissent ruthlessly and sought to control knowledge and information. For all his power, for all his achievements, Qin Shi Huang was haunted by one thing he could not control: death. He sent expeditions seeking the islands of the immortals, places where the elixir of life could supposedly be obtained. He consumed mercury and other substances believed to grant longevity. Ironically, these medicines likely hastened his death through mercury poisoning. In 210 BCE, while on a tour of his empire, Qin Shi Huang died, possibly from mercury poisoning. His death was kept secret by Li Si and the eunuch Zhao Gao, who forged documents to name the emperor's pliable younger son as heir instead of the designated crown prince. When the truth emerged, the crown prince committed suicide, and the second emperor proved weak and ineffective. Within 4 years of the first emperor's death, his empire was in rebellion. Within 15 years, the Qin dynasty had fallen, replaced by the Han. The harsh legalist policies that had built the empire proved unable to sustain it. The massive construction projects had exhausted the people. The repression of thought had created simmering resentment. The empire Qin Shi Huang believed would last 10,000 generations collapsed almost before his body was cold in its mercury-flooded tomb. Yet the first emperor's legacy endured. China would never again fragment into the hundreds of small states of pre-Qin times. The administrative structures he created, commanderies, appointed officials, standardized measurements and writing, would be adopted and refined by subsequent dynasties. The very concept of a unified Chinese empire ruling all under heaven begins with Qin Shi Huang. And somewhere beneath Mount Li, if Sima Qian is to be believed, the first emperor lies still in his underground palace, guarded by his terracotta army, surrounded by rivers of mercury, waiting in an eternal empire of his own creation. If the story of how China first unified is gripping you, and you want to see how the empire evolved through golden ages and devastating falls, make sure you're subscribed. We're approaching the golden age of the Han Dynasty next, where Chinese civilization will reach new heights of power, culture, and innovation. Don't miss what comes next. Golden Ages and Expansion, Han, Tang, and Song Dynasties. The Han Dynasty, which followed the Qin, would give China its most enduring name. Even today, the majority ethnic group in China calls itself the Han people. But this was far from inevitable when Liu Bang, a peasant-turned-rebel leader, emerged victorious from the chaos following the Qin collapse. Liu Bang, known posthumously as Emperor Gaozu, was the opposite of aristocratic. A minor official before the Qin collapse, he lacked the classical education and noble lineage that traditionally qualified men for power. Yet he proved a brilliant leader, able to attract talented advisors, inspire loyalty, and defeat rivals including the aristocratic Xiangyu, whose military genius was undone by strategic misjudgments and political failures. The Han dynasty that Emperor Gaozu founded in 202 BCE would last, with one interruption, for over 400 years, longer than the entire history of the United States as of 2026. This longevity came from learning the lessons of Qin's collapse. The early Han emperors retained Qin's administrative structure, the unified empire, the commanderies, the bureaucracy, but they softened legalism's harsh edges with Confucian principles of virtuous governance. The Han dynasty is divided into two periods: the Western Han, 202 BC 9 CE, and the Eastern Han, 25 to 220 CE, separated by the brief Xan dynasty of Wang Mang, a usurper who implemented radical reforms before being overthrown. We'll focus primarily on the Western Han, particularly the reign of Emperor Wu, when the Han reached its greatest extent and influence. Emperor Wu, who reigned from 141 to 87 BCE, was one of Chinese history's most ambitious and consequential rulers. He expanded China's borders dramatically, pushing into Central Asia, Vietnam, and Korea. He established control over the Silk Road trade routes, bringing unprecedented wealth and cultural exchange. He made Confucianism the official state ideology while pragmatically employing legalist methods when necessary. And he created the bureaucratic examination system that would, in refined form, select Chinese officials for the next 2,000 years. Emperor Wu's campaigns against the Xiongnu, the nomadic confederation that had plagued China's northern borders since Qin times, were particularly significant. Unable to defeat the Xiongnu through defensive measures alone, Emperor Wu adopted an aggressive strategy. He sent massive armies deep into the steppes, cutting off Xiongnu access to key grazing lands and water sources. He established military colonies in the northwest to maintain permanent Chinese presence. Most cleverly, Emperor Wu sent the diplomat Zhang Qian on an epic journey westward to form an alliance with the Yuezhi people against the Xiongnu. Though this diplomatic mission ultimately failed in its primary objective, Zhang Qian's travels opened Chinese eyes to the existence of sophisticated civilizations far to the west. His reports described great kingdoms in Central Asia, Persia, and even vaguely Rome, the De Qin or Great Qin, so called because Romans reportedly impressed Chinese envoys as organized and powerful like the Qin Empire. The Silk Road, actually a network of routes rather than a single road, became the conduit for one of history's most remarkable exchanges of goods, ideas, and cultures. Chinese silk flowed westward, so prized in Rome that senators attempted to ban it as excessive and effeminate, even though they didn't know where it came from or how it was made. Gold, silver, horses, jade, spices, and ideas flowed along the same routes. Buddhism entered China via the Silk Road, initially during the Han Dynasty, though it would not become dominant until later periods. This was not a violent conquest of one religion over another, but a gradual process of adaptation and synthesis. Buddhism was translated into Chinese concepts, often using Taoist terminology. Chinese Buddhism developed unique characteristics, including Chan Zen, which synthesized Buddhist meditation with Taoist spontaneity. The Han Dynasty saw remarkable technological and cultural achievements. Paper was invented during the Han. The earliest examples date to the 2nd century BCE, though it would be refined over subsequent centuries. This revolution in information storage and transmission cannot be overstated. Before paper, writing was done on expensive silk, heavy bamboo slips, or carved in wood and stone. Paper made books accessible and knowledge easier to preserve and transmit. The Han also saw advances in metallurgy, particularly the development of steel through repeated forging and folding. Han scientists created the first seismoscope, a device invented by Zhang Heng around 132 CE that could detect earthquakes and roughly indicate their direction. The device used a pendulum mechanism connected to dragon heads holding bronze balls. When an earthquake occurred, balls would drop from the mouths of dragons facing the quake's direction into the mouths of bronze toads below. In astronomy, Han scholars compiled detailed star catalogs, recorded sunspots and supernovae, and developed increasingly accurate calendars essential for agricultural planning and ritual scheduling. In medicine, texts like the Huangdi Neijing Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon systematized traditional Chinese medicine's theories of qi, yin and yang, and the 5 elements. Confucianism, adopted as official ideology by Emperor Wu, shaped Han governance and society profoundly. The 5 classics, the Book of Changes, Book of Documents, Book of Poetry, Book of Rites, and Spring and Autumn Annals, became the foundation of education. Mastery of these texts, and the ability to apply Confucian principles to governance, became the path to official appointment. But the examination system was not yet the meritocratic institution it would later become. Recommendations from high officials still mattered more than raw ability. Wealthy families could afford the years of study required to master the classics. And Confucian ideology, with its emphasis on hierarchy and filial piety, reinforced existing power structures even as it provided some social mobility for talented scholars of modest background. The Han Dynasty's prosperity rested on the labor of millions of peasants working small plots, paying taxes in grain and labor service, and subject to conscription for military service or public works. Life for most people was hardscrabble, farming with simple tools, living in modest houses, vulnerable to drought, flood, disease, and the demands of officials. Yet Han cities, particularly the capital Chang'an, were centers of remarkable sophistication. Chang'an at its height had a population approaching 250,000, making it one of the world's largest cities. Markets sold goods from across Asia. Palaces and temples demonstrated architectural ambition. Entertainment districts offered acrobatics, music, and storytelling. The wealthy lived in multi-courtyard residences with elaborate gardens. Women in Han society occupied a complicated position. Confucian ideology emphasized female subordination to father, husband, and son. Yet powerful women existed: empress dowagers who ruled as regents, and elite women who received classical education and wrote poetry. For peasant women, ideology mattered less than the practical realities of agricultural labor. They worked fields alongside men and held essential roles in household economy. The Han Dynasty's eventual decline followed a pattern that would become depressingly familiar in Chinese history. Power concentrated in the hands of empress families and eunuchs, both categories of people who could access the emperor but were theoretically prevented from founding rival dynasties. Officials became increasingly corrupt. Land accumulated in the hands of the wealthy, creating a class of landless peasants vulnerable to recruitment by rebels. Natural disasters, floods, droughts, locusts, were interpreted as signs heaven had withdrawn its mandate. In 184 CE, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted, a massive uprising with religious and peasant components. Though suppressed, it fatally weakened the Han government. Regional warlords gained autonomy as they raised armies to fight the rebels. By 220 CE, the last Han emperor abdicated, and China fragmented into the Three Kingdoms period, a time of warfare, heroism, and political intrigue romanticized in later literature but marked by devastating population decline and human suffering. The period from the Han collapse in 220 CE to the reunification under the Sui dynasty in 589 CE is often called the period of disunion. China fragmented into multiple competing kingdoms, some ruled by Han Chinese, others by peoples from the northern steppes and western regions who had moved into Chinese territory. This was a time of warfare and instability, but also of cultural development and change. Buddhism flourished during this period, offering spiritual solace in troubled times. Magnificent cave temples were carved at sites like Dunhuang, Longmen, and Yungang. Entire cliff faces transformed into Buddhist grottos with massive statues and intricate carvings and paintings. These weren't merely religious sites but also expressions of political legitimacy, as rulers patronized Buddhist establishments to demonstrate piety and power. The period of disunion also saw significant northern influences on Chinese culture. Non-Han peoples brought new military techniques, especially cavalry warfare. They introduced new foods, clothing styles, and musical traditions. This period demonstrates that Chinese civilization, despite its rhetoric of cultural purity and superiority, has always been shaped by interaction with and absorption of non-Han peoples and cultures. In 581 CE, Yang Jian, a general in one of the northern dynasties, seized power and founded the Sui dynasty. By 589, he had conquered the south and reunified China after nearly 4 centuries of division. The Sui would prove short-lived. Only 2 emperors over 37 years, but they laid essential foundations for the dynasty that followed. The Sui's most important achievement was the Grand Canal, a massive engineering project connecting the Yellow River in the north with the Yangtze River in the south. This allowed grain from the productive south to feed the armies and administrators in the north, and facilitated trade and communication across the empire's vast extent. Parts of the Grand Canal remain in use today, over 1,400 years later. But the Grand Canal, like the Great Wall before it, came at terrible human cost. Millions of workers were conscripted, working under brutal conditions. The Sui's second emperor, Yang Guang, launched disastrous military campaigns against Korea, further draining resources and human lives. By 618, the Sui collapsed amid rebellion and usurpation. The dynasty that emerged from this chaos would be one of China's greatest, the Tang. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, represents what many historians consider the golden age of Chinese civilization. Tang China was the world's most powerful, wealthy, and culturally sophisticated civilization. Its capital, Chang'an, rebuilt and expanded from the Han city, was the world's largest city with over 1 million inhabitants. It was a cosmopolitan metropolis where Persian merchants, Arab traders, Indian monks, Korean scholars, and Japanese emissaries mingled with Chinese of all social classes. Tang China was remarkably open to foreign influences. Buddhism reached its peak of influence, with massive monasteries wielding significant economic and political power. Foreign religions were tolerated. Nestorian Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and later Islam all had followers in Tang China. Foreign fashions influenced Chinese clothing, music, and cuisine. Tang art shows Greek, Persian, and Indian influences alongside Chinese traditions. This cosmopolitanism extended to governance. The Tang implemented the most refined version yet of the examination system, testing candidates on their knowledge of Confucian classics, history, and contemporary policy issues. While still favoring the wealthy who could afford education, the system created pathways for talented men of modest background to rise through government service. The Tang bureaucracy became a model of efficient administration. The greatest Tang emperor, Tang Taizong, r. 626 to 649, established standards of governance that would echo through Chinese history. He promoted competent officials regardless of their support for him during his violent rise to power. He'd seized the throne from his father after killing 2 brothers in an ambush. He listened to critical advisors, famously asking the Confucian scholar Wei Zheng to remonstrate with him when he erred. He combined military strength with diplomatic skill, earning the title Heavenly Kagan from Central Asian peoples. But perhaps the most remarkable Tang ruler was a woman who officially should never have ruled at all. Wu Ziqian began as a concubine of Tang Taizong. After his death, she should have been sent to a Buddhist nunnery, as was customary for deceased emperors' concubines. Instead, she became the favorite of Taizong's son, the new Emperor Gaozong. Through intelligence, ruthlessness and political skill, she rose to become empress, then de facto ruler when Gaozong's health failed, and finally in 690, she took the extraordinary step of declaring herself emperor, not empress but Huangdi, the male-gendered term for supreme ruler, of her own dynasty, the Zhou. Wu Ziqian's reign is controversial. Traditional Confucian historians depicted her as a monstrous usurper who murdered her way to power and violated the natural order by ruling as a woman. More recent scholarship presents a more nuanced picture. A capable administrator who promoted meritocracy, expanded the examination system to recruit loyal officials, patronized Buddhism to counterbalance Confucian opposition to female rule, and maintained Tang prosperity and territorial integrity. What's clear is that Wu Ziqian wielded power effectively for decades in a system designed to exclude women from authority. After her death in 705, the Tang was restored, and subsequent historians ensured her reputation suffered. But they could not erase the fact that she had ruled and ruled successfully as emperor. The Tang dynasty saw poetry reach heights rarely equaled in any language. Li Bai, Du Fu by Zhu and Wang Wei created works of such beauty and emotional depth that they're still memorized and recited by Chinese students today. Tang poets wrote about everything: the beauty of mountains and rivers, the sorrow of separation, the pleasures of wine, the hardships of common people, the corruption of officials, the sadness of growing old. Tang visual arts were equally remarkable. Pottery, horses and camels captured the vitality of Silk Road trade. Tricolor glazed ceramics combined technical sophistication with artistic beauty. Buddhist sculptures and cave temples achieved serene perfection. Landscape painting developed as a major art form, with theories about how to capture the essence of nature rather than merely reproducing its appearance. But the Tang dynasty's golden age did not last. In 755, General An Lushan, a military governor on the northeast frontier, rebelled. The An Lushan rebellion lasted 8 years and devastated Tang China. The capital Chang'an was sacked, the emperor fled, and millions died. Though the Tang nominally survived another century and a half, it never fully recovered. Power shifted from the central government to regional military governors who became increasingly independent. By 907, the Tang finally collapsed, fragmenting into the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. Once again, China was divided, though not for as long as the period of disunion. In 960, General Zhao Kuangyin, commander of one of the 5 dynasties' armies, was persuaded by his troops to proclaim himself emperor, founding the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty, 960-1279, never matched the Tang's military power or territorial extent. The Song lost control of the northern frontiers to semi-nomadic peoples like the Khitan Liao and Jurchen Jin, and eventually the Song court was forced to flee south, establishing the southern Song with a capital at Hangzhou. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, this military weakness, the Song dynasty was an era of extraordinary economic development, technological innovation and cultural sophistication. The Song economy was the most advanced in the world. Agriculture became more productive through new rice strains from Southeast Asia that allowed 2 or even 3 harvests per year, expanded irrigation and better tools. Population increased dramatically. Song China may have reached 100 million people, more than the entire population of Europe. Urbanization accelerated. Kaifeng, the northern Song capital, had over 1 million inhabitants. When the Song moved to Hangzhou after losing the north, that city swelled to similar size. These were not just large but also sophisticated cities with paved streets, fire departments, complex water supply systems, entertainment districts, restaurants, tea houses and markets selling goods from across Asia. Commerce flourished as never before. A merchant class grew wealthy from trade, developing sophisticated business practices including joint stock companies, promissory notes and bills of exchange. The Song government, unable to afford massive armies like the Tang, relied on commercial taxes and monopolies on salt, iron, and other goods for revenue. Most remarkably, the Song invented paper money. Initially, merchants in Sichuan province used paper certificates representing copper coin deposits, finding these easier to transport than heavy metal. The government recognized the potential and began issuing official paper currency, the world's first government-issued paper money, over 6 centuries before Europe adopted the practice. The Song period saw a burst of technological innovation. Movable type printing was invented by Sheng around 1040, using ceramic characters. While this never fully replaced woodblock printing in China due to the Chinese writing system's thousands of characters, It represents a conceptual leap toward mass production of texts. Gunpowder, invented earlier but used primarily for fireworks and alchemy, was weaponized during the Song. Fire lances, tubes filled with gunpowder and projectiles, represent the first guns. Bombs and grenades made from gunpowder in iron or ceramic casings became standard siege weapons. The Song even developed rockets and land mines. These weapons didn't prevent Song military defeats, but they would eventually transform warfare worldwide. The magnetic compass, invented earlier, was refined and widely adopted for navigation during the Song. Chinese ships using compasses sailed to Southeast Asia, India, and East Africa, participating in the Indian Ocean trade network. Chinese maritime technology, watertight bulkheads, multiple masts, stern-mounted rudders, made their ships the most sophisticated in the world. If you're amazed by how advanced Song China was, and you want to explore how these innovations spread worldwide and discover the mysteries that still puzzle archaeologists, subscribe now. We're about to dive deep into China's legendary rulers, the greatest engineering projects in history, and unsolved enigmas that continue to baffle scholars. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any part of this journey. Dynasties and legendary rulers. Every great civilization produces figures whose deeds and personalities shape history long after their deaths. China, with its 4,000-year recorded history, has produced more than its share. Some were brilliant administrators, others visionary reformers, still others brutal tyrants. Some were all three. Let us examine the lives and legacies of the individuals who define Chinese imperial history. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. We've already encountered Qin Shi Huang, but his story deserves deeper examination. Born Ing Zheng in 259 BCE, he was the son of a Qin prince and a concubine, or possibly a courtesan and the merchant Lu Buwei. Ancient sources tell contradictory stories. He became king of Qin at age 13 after his father's death, though real power rested with his regent Lu Buwei. The young king faced assassination attempts and political conspiracies. In one famous incident, Jing Ku, an assassin sent by the Yan state, approached with a map supposedly showing territories to be ceded to Qin. The map concealed a dagger. As Jing Ku unrolled it and grabbed the dagger, the king fled, running around a pillar while his guards, forbidden to carry weapons in the throne room, stood helpless. Finally, a court physician threw his medicine bag at the assassin, giving the king time to draw his sword and wound Jing Ku, who was then killed by guards. This experience may have intensified Qin Shi Huang's paranoia and his obsession with security and control. As he conquered the other states, he became increasingly autocratic, trusting few, suspicious of all. His reliance on Li and legalist philosophy gave him tools for absolute control but also isolated him from corrective feedback. The first emperor's personal life remains mysterious. Ancient sources mention numerous concubines but say little about his relationships with them. His decision not to name an empress suggests either political caution or personal inclination against forming such bonds. His later years were dominated by the search for immortality, consuming mercury pills that likely poisoned him, sending expeditions to mythical islands, a powerful man rendered helpless before death's inevitability. Emperor Wu of Han, the martial emperor. If Qin Shi Huang created the unified empire, Emperor Wu perfected it. Born Lu Che in 156 BCE, he became emperor at age 15 and ruled for 54 years, one of the longest reigns in Chinese history. Where Qin Shi Huang relied on pure legalism, Emperor Wu synthesized legalist efficiency with Confucian legitimacy, creating a hybrid system that would characterize Chinese governance for 2 millennia. Emperor Wu's personality was complex. He could be generous to faithful servants but ruthless to rivals. He loved poetry and music, patronized arts and scholarship, yet launched aggressive military campaigns that cost countless lives. He was intensely curious about the world beyond China, yet autocratic in his rule. His relationship with the Confucian philosopher Dong Zhongshu exemplifies this complexity. Dong argued that heaven communicated through natural phenomena, warning bad rulers through disasters. Emperor Wu accepted this framework, performing elaborate rituals and sacrifices to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Yet when Dong's theories implied criticism of imperial policy, Emperor Wu had him dismissed. Confucianism would legitimize the emperor, but it would not constrain him. Emperor Wu's military campaigns transformed China from a defensive regional power to an expansive empire. His armies pushed into Central Asia, establishing the protectorate of the western regions that controlled the Silk Road. He conquered Nanyue, modern Vietnam, and Guangdong, in the south. He sent armies into Korea, establishing commanderies that would influence the peninsula for centuries. He fought decades of campaigns against the Xiongnu, never fully defeating them but pushing them back and fragmenting their power. These campaigns were extraordinarily expensive, draining the treasury accumulated by earlier Han emperors. Emperor Wu implemented state monopolies on salt and iron, imposed new taxes, debased coinage, and sold offices, measures that generated revenue but also corruption and resentment. Toward the end of his reign, exhausted by constant warfare, he issued the Repenting Edict, acknowledging that his policies had caused suffering and vowing to emphasize recuperation over expansion. Tang Taizong, the model emperor. Li Shimin, known posthumously as Tang Taizong, set standards for imperial governance that later dynasties would aspire to match. But his path to the throne was soaked in blood. In 626, he ambushed and killed his elder brother the crown prince and younger brother, presenting his father Emperor Gaozu with a fait accompli. Gaozu, powerless, abdicated in favor of this murderous but capable son. As emperor, Taizong demonstrated the paradox of Confucian governance. The ideology emphasized virtuous conduct, yet politics often required ruthless pragmatism. Taizong addressed this contradiction by being unusually open to criticism. He appointed Wei Zheng, who had served his murdered brother, as a chief advisor, specifically asking Wei to point out his errors. The stories of Wei Zheng's remonstrances and Taizong's acceptance of them became legendary. Once, when Taizong was planning an extravagant hunting expedition, Wei Zheng criticized the waste and distraction from governance. Taizong canceled the trip. Another time, Wei Zheng pointed out that Taizong was favoring old friends over capable strangers in appointments. Taizong reformed his appointment process. When Wei Zheng died, Taizong reportedly said, "With a bronze mirror, you can see whether your appearance is correct. With history as a mirror, you can understand the rise and fall of dynasties. With a person as a mirror, you can see your gains and losses. Now that Wei Zheng is dead, I have lost a mirror." Yet this same emperor could be ruthless. He executed or exiled rivals. He launched military campaigns that killed thousands. He took his father's concubine Wu Zetian as his own, a violation of Confucian propriety that he rationalized through desire. The ideal emperor was still human, still flawed. Wu Zetian, the only female emperor. Wu Zetian's story is one of the most remarkable in Chinese history. Born to a wealthy merchant family in 624, she entered the palace as a concubine of Tang Taizong at about 14. She was noted for her beauty, intelligence, and ambition. The story goes that when Taizong asked how to control a difficult horse, she replied, "3 things are needed: an iron whip, an iron hammer, and a dagger. First whip it with the iron whip. If it doesn't submit, beat its head with the iron hammer. If it still doesn't submit, cut its throat with the dagger." This anecdote, whether true or not, captures her reputation for ruthlessness. When Taizong died, Wu Zetian was sent to a Buddhist nunnery, but she had already caught the eye of the crown prince, who would become Emperor Gaozong. He retrieved her from the nunnery and made her a consort. Wu Zetian systematically eliminated rivals, including allegedly murdering her own infant daughter and blaming the empress, who was then deposed. Wu Zetian became empress and, as Gaozong's health failed, de facto ruler. After Gaozong's death in 683, Wu Zetian ruled through her sons as Empress Dowager, then in 690 took the ultimate step, proclaiming herself emperor of a new Zhou dynasty. This was unprecedented. Women had wielded power as empress dowagers or regents, but Wu Zetian claimed the mandate of heaven for herself. To legitimize female rule, she promoted Buddhism over Confucianism, as Buddhism had female deities and was more accepting of women's spiritual authority. She commissioned the Dayun Sutra, which prophesied that Maitreya Buddha would be reincarnated as a female monarch. She appointed loyalists to key positions, used the secret police and denunciation systems ruthlessly, and presented herself as a sage ruler bringing prosperity and peace. By most objective measures, Wu Zetian ruled effectively. The empire remained prosperous and stable. The examination system was expanded, recruiting capable officials loyal to her rather than to aristocratic families. Culture flourished. The Longmen Grotto's magnificent Buddha statues were carved during her reign. Military campaigns maintained Tang borders. Yet traditional Confucian historians condemned her utterly. She violated the gender hierarchy fundamental to Confucian order. She supposedly murdered rivals brutally. Her own sons were exiled or intimidated. Her grandson, the crown prince, was forced to commit suicide. Whether these accusations are entirely accurate or exaggerated by hostile sources is debated by modern scholars. In 705, at age 81, Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate during a palace coup. She died that same year and the Tang dynasty was restored. Her Zhou dynasty, lasting only 15 years, was treated as a usurpation, her accomplishments downplayed or attributed to advisors. But the fact remains, she ruled as emperor and China survived and prospered. Kublai Khan, the foreign emperor. Kublai Khan represents something unique in Chinese history. A foreign conqueror who successfully claimed the mandate of heaven and ruled as a Chinese emperor while maintaining Mongol identity and power. Kublai was the grandson of Genghis Khan, whose Mongol armies had conquered the largest contiguous land empire in history. When Kublai became Great Khan in 1260, he faced a choice: rule as a Mongol nomadic chief or adapt to the sophisticated governance systems of the conquered sedentary civilizations, particularly China. Kublai chose adaptation. He established his capital at Dadu, Beijing, built in Chinese style. He proclaimed the Yuan dynasty in 1271, claiming continuity with previous Chinese dynasties. He performed Chinese imperial rituals, patronized Confucian scholars, and presented himself as a legitimate Chinese emperor. Yet he also maintained Mongol military supremacy, appointing Mongols to top military and political positions, restricting Han Chinese from certain roles, and preserving Mongol cultural practices. The conquest of the southern Song, completed in 1279, made Kublai the ruler of all China. This was the first time since the fall of the Tang that China was united, and the first time a non-Han person ruled a unified China. How Kublai managed to integrate Mongol rule with Chinese expectations of proper governance was a remarkable balancing act. Kublai Khan's court in Dadu was cosmopolitan beyond precedent. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant whose account would introduce China to Europe, served in Kublai's administration. Muslim, Christian, and Buddhist advisors all had influence. The Yuan court patronized arts and scholarship from diverse traditions. Yet Yuan rule remained exploitative. The Mongols extracted wealth from China to support their empire. They divided subjects into ethnic categories: Mongols at the top, Central Asian allies next, Northern Chinese below them, and Southern Chinese at the bottom, restricting opportunities based on ethnicity. Heavy taxation funded Mongol military campaigns and luxurious court life. Failed military adventures in Japan, Java, and Vietnam drained resources without corresponding gains. The Yongle Emperor, the ambitious restorer. Zhu Di, the Yongle Emperor, exemplifies the gap between Confucian ideals and political reality. He seized power from his nephew in a civil war, violating the Confucian principle that rulers should accept their assigned place in the hierarchy. Once in power, he became one of the Ming dynasty's most ambitious and effective emperors, launching projects that would define China for centuries. The Yongle Emperor moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing, rebuilding the city on a massive scale. The Forbidden City, the imperial palace complex that still stands today, was constructed during his reign, a vast complex of nearly 1,000 buildings arranged according to strict ceremonial principles, representing the cosmic order with the emperor at its center. He compiled the Yongle Encyclopedia, an enormous collection of all significant Chinese knowledge, comprising some 11,000 volumes. Most of this encyclopedia was lost over subsequent centuries, but it represented an attempt to preserve and systematize Chinese learning. Most dramatically, the Yongle Emperor sponsored the voyages of Zheng He, the Muslim eunuch admiral who commanded fleets of treasure ships, on 7 expeditions across the Indian Ocean between 1405 and 1433. These ships were enormous. The largest may have been over 400 feet long, dwarfing Columbus's ships that would sail decades later. Zheng He's fleets visited Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, Arabia, and East Africa. They returned with tribute, exotic animals like giraffes, and knowledge of distant lands. The purpose was not conquest or colonization but demonstration of Chinese power and collection of tribute, reinforcing the Middle Kingdom's view of itself as the center of civilization to which all other peoples should pay homage. After the Yongle Emperor's death, his successors discontinued the voyages, viewing them as extravagant wastes of resources. China turned inward, a decision with profound historical consequences. While European powers were beginning their age of exploration that would lead to colonial empires, China withdrew from the seas, eventually falling behind in naval technology and global trade networks. The Qianlong Emperor, the zenith and the beginning of decline. The Qianlong Emperor, who reigned from 1735 to 1796, officially abdicating to avoid ruling longer than his grandfather the Kangxi Emperor, though remaining de facto ruler until his death, presided over what appeared to be the height of Chinese power and culture. The Qing dynasty, founded by Manchu conquest in 1644, had by Qianlong's time achieved stability and prosperity. Qianlong was an accomplished poet, calligrapher, and patron of arts. He commissioned massive literary projects, expanded the imperial collection of art and antiquities, and built elaborate garden palaces. The population of China doubled during the 18th century, reaching perhaps 300 million by Qianlong's death, a testament to prosperity and improved agriculture. Yet beneath this veneer of success, problems were accumulating. Population growth outpaced agricultural expansion, leading to land pressure and peasant immiseration. Corruption spread through the bureaucracy. The emperor's favorite, Hushan, embezzled amounts that would make modern kleptocrats envious. The military, victorious in Central Asian campaigns, grew complacent and undisciplined. Most crucially, Qianlong's China faced a changing world. European powers were industrializing, developing technologies that would give them overwhelming military advantage. Global trade networks were shifting. China's traditional tribute system, where foreign peoples acknowledged Chinese superiority in exchange for trade privileges, was incompatible with European demands for equal diplomatic relations and open markets. In 1793, the British sent Lord Macartney's embassy to Qianlong's court, seeking expanded trade relations and diplomatic equality. The embassy was treated as a tribute mission. Qianlong sent a letter to King George III explaining that China had no need for British goods and that the British should be grateful for the privilege of limited trade at Canton. This fundamental misunderstanding of the shifting global balance would have catastrophic consequences for China in the next century. These emperors, Qin Shi Huang, Wu of Han, Taizong, Wu Zetian, Kublai Khan, Yongle, Qianlong, and many others we lack time to fully explore, shaped China's trajectory. They were not mere symbols but active agents whose decisions echoed through generations. Their successes and failures, their virtues and vices, their brilliance and brutality all contributed to the civilization we're exploring. Now let us turn from the individuals to the collective achievements, the inventions, technologies, and engineering marvels that made Chinese civilization a beacon of innovation for millennia. Inventions, technology, and engineering marvels. There is a phrase in Chinese, the four great inventions: paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass. These innovations, developed in China centuries before they appeared in Europe, transformed human civilization. But they are merely the most famous among countless Chinese contributions to technology and engineering. Let us examine these achievements and their profound impacts. Paper, the democratization of knowledge. Before paper, writing materials included animal bones, bronze vessels, strips of bamboo tied together, wooden tablets, and silk. Each had limitations. Oracle bones and bronze could only hold brief inscriptions. Bamboo and wooden strips were heavy and bulky. A single book might require dozens of bamboo strips transported in carts. Silk was expensive, limiting writing to the wealthy and powerful. Paper changed everything. The earliest examples of paper made from plant fibers date to the Western Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, found in tombs in Gansu province. These early papers were rough and primarily used for wrapping or padding. The invention of high-quality writing paper is traditionally attributed to Kai Luan, a court eunuch, in 105 CE during the Eastern Han. Kai Luan's innovation involved systematizing and improving the paper-making process. He experimented with different plant materials: tree bark, hemp, rags, fishnets. The process involved breaking down these materials into fibers, suspending them in water, spreading the mixture on screens to form sheets, pressing out water and drying the sheets. The result was a lightweight, relatively inexpensive material perfect for writing. The impact was revolutionary. Books became more accessible. Bureaucrats could maintain more detailed records. Scholars could compile encyclopedias and commentaries. Letters could be written and sent more easily. Knowledge spread more rapidly. Paper-making technology gradually spread along the Silk Road, to Central Asia by the 6th century, to the Islamic world by the 8th century, possibly learned from Chinese prisoners after the Battle of Talas in 751, and finally to Europe via Islamic Spain in the 12th century. Printing, from stamps to movable type. The next logical step after paper was finding faster ways to reproduce text than hand copying. Woodblock printing emerged during the Tang Dynasty. Craftsmen carved characters in reverse on wooden blocks, inked the blocks and pressed paper against them. Each block could produce many copies of a single page. The oldest known printed book is the Diamond Sutra, a Buddhist text printed in 868 CE during the Tang Dynasty, discovered in the Dunhuang caves. The quality of its printing demonstrates sophisticated technique. Clear characters, minimal smudging, consistent ink coverage. Woodblock printing was particularly suited to Buddhist texts and Confucian classics that would be reproduced many times. During the Song dynasty, printing became widespread. Government offices printed official documents. Publishers produced books for the growing literate merchant class. Paper money was printed. The Song government faced challenges with woodblock counterfeiting, attempting various anti-counterfeiting measures like complex designs and color printing. The next innovation was movable type. Bai Sheng, a commoner during the Northern Song dynasty, 1041 to 1048, invented movable type using ceramic characters. Characters were carved on individual pieces of clay, fired to harden them, then arranged in an iron frame filled with a mixture of pine resin, wax, and paper ash. After printing, heat softened the mixture, allowing characters to be removed and rearranged for the next page. Movable type was later refined using wooden and metal characters. However, it never fully replaced woodblock printing in China. The Chinese writing system has thousands of characters, making complete sets of movable type expensive and unwieldy. For texts printed in many copies, woodblock remained more practical. Carve once, print many times. Movable type proved more revolutionary in alphabetic writing systems like Korean and, eventually, European languages. Nevertheless, Chinese movable type represents a conceptual leap, from reproducing fixed pages to assembling flexible text from reusable components. This concept, adapted to European languages by Johannes Gutenberg in the 1450s, would trigger the information revolution that characterized the early modern period. Gunpowder, from elixir to explosion. Gunpowder's invention began with Taoist alchemists seeking the elixir of immortality. By mixing saltpeter, potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal in various proportions and heating them, they sought to create substances that would prolong life. Instead, they created explosive mixtures. The earliest references to gunpowder appear in Tang Dynasty texts. A 9th-century alchemical text warns against mixing certain substances as they produce fire that burns hands and faces and even burns down buildings. By the Song dynasty, military applications were being developed. The earliest gunpowder weapons were fire lances, bamboo or metal tubes filled with gunpowder and projectiles, essentially primitive guns. Song armies also used bombs, gunpowder enclosed in iron or ceramic containers that would explode, sending shrapnel in all directions. Rockets were developed by attaching gunpowder charges to arrows. Smoke bombs used gunpowder to create thick smoke for signaling or concealment. The Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China during the Southern Song period, used gunpowder extensively in their warfare. The Mongols, fighting both the Jin and Song, adopted gunpowder weapons and spread them across their vast empire. By the time Mongol armies reached the Middle East and Europe, they brought knowledge of gunpowder that would transform warfare worldwide. Early firearms were unreliable and often more dangerous to their operators than enemies. But by the Ming dynasty, China had developed sophisticated cannon, handguns, and explosive devices. Ironically, European powers, adopting and refining gunpowder weapons, would eventually use them to dominate China in the 19th and 20th centuries. The compass, finding direction. The magnetic compass originated from Chinese observations that lodestone, magnetized magnetite, naturally aligns north-south. By the Han dynasty, diviners used magnetic, south-pointing spoons, resting on polished bronze plates marked with directions. These were not navigation tools but devices for determining auspicious directions for buildings and tombs according to feng shui principles. By the Song dynasty, the compass was applied to navigation. The technique of magnetizing iron needles by stroking them with lodestone was developed. These needles, floated in water or suspended on threads, provided reliable direction finding. Chinese ships sailing to Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean used compasses to navigate beyond sight of land. The compass reached Europe via Arab traders or returning crusaders around the 12th or 13th century. Its impact on European navigation and the age of exploration cannot be overstated. Without compasses, Columbus, da Gama, and Magellan would have been impossible. Silk, the fabric that connected continents. Silk production, sericulture, was developed in China by at least the Neolithic period. The process begins with silkworm eggs, which hatch into caterpillars that feed exclusively on mulberry leaves. After growing through multiple molts, the caterpillar spins a cocoon from a single strand of silk fiber that can be over 900 meters long. By carefully unwinding these cocoons in hot water, silk threads can be collected and woven into fabric of extraordinary smoothness and beauty. For millennia, China monopolized silk production. The secret of sericulture was closely guarded. Exporting silkworms or mulberry seeds was punishable by death. Chinese silk became the most desired luxury good in the ancient world. Roman senators wore silk togas despite not knowing where silk came from or how it was made. The demand for silk helped establish the trade routes known collectively as the Silk Road. Eventually, the secret of sericulture spread, allegedly smuggled to the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century CE by monks hiding silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds in hollow staffs. But by then, Chinese silk's reputation for quality was established, and China remained a major silk producer for centuries. Porcelain, white gold. True porcelain, hard, white, translucent, impermeable ceramic, was developed in China during the Tang dynasty and perfected during the Song. Its production required specific clays, kaolin, high firing temperatures, over 1,200 degrees Celsius, and sophisticated kiln designs. Chinese porcelain was prized across Asia and eventually Europe for its beauty and utility. It was harder and less porous than European pottery, able to hold hot liquids without cracking, and its smooth glazed surface was easy to clean. The finest examples, blue and white porcelain, celadone with its subtle green glaze, delicate eggshell porcelain, were works of art. European attempts to replicate porcelain failed for centuries. Not until the 18th century did European potters, through experimentation and possibly industrial espionage, discover the secrets of hard-paste porcelain production. Until then, Chinese porcelain was so valuable that European royalty displayed it in special cabinets and even had pieces mounted in gold settings. The seismoscope, detecting Earth's movements. In 132 CE during the Han Dynasty, the polymath Zhang Heng invented the first seismoscope. The device was a large bronze vessel about 8 feet in diameter, with 8 dragon heads arranged around its circumference, each holding a bronze ball in its mouth. Below each dragon was a bronze toad with mouth open. Inside the vessel was a pendulum mechanism. When an earthquake occurred, even one too distant to be felt locally, the ground vibrations would cause the pendulum to swing. The pendulum was connected to a mechanism that would open one of the dragon's mouths, releasing the ball to fall into the corresponding toad's mouth with a loud noise. The direction of the earthquake could be determined by which dragon dropped its ball. According to historical records, the seismoscope once indicated an earthquake to the west when nothing was felt in the capital Luoyang. Days later, messengers arrived reporting an earthquake hundreds of miles to the west. The device's accuracy impressed the court and demonstrated Han Dynasty scientific sophistication. While Zhang Heng's seismoscope couldn't measure earthquake magnitude like modern seismographs, it represented remarkable understanding of how seismic waves propagate through the earth and could be detected through their effects on a sensitive pendulum mechanism. Metallurgy, iron and steel. Chinese metallurgy advanced faster than European for much of ancient and medieval history. By the 4th century BCE, Chinese craftsmen had developed blast furnaces capable of melting iron, requiring temperatures around 1,500 degrees Celsius, allowing cast iron production. Europe wouldn't achieve this until the 15th century CE. Cast iron was used for agricultural tools, weapons, and architectural elements. But cast iron is brittle. For weapons and tools requiring toughness and flexibility, steel was needed. Chinese metallurgists developed sophisticated steel-making techniques, including co-fusion, melting iron and wrought iron together, and decarburization, removing carbon from cast iron through heating and hammering. During the Han Dynasty, Chinese swords used sophisticated techniques including pattern welding and differential hardening, heating different parts of the blade to different temperatures to create a hard edge and flexible spine. These techniques would be refined over centuries, culminating in the legendary craftsmanship of Tang and Song-era weapons. The scale of Chinese iron production during the Song Dynasty was remarkable, perhaps 125,000 tons per year, a level Europe wouldn't reach until the 18th century Industrial Revolution. This iron was used for agricultural tools that increased farm productivity, for weapons equipping large armies, and for construction, including iron pagodas that still stand today. The Great Wall, symbol of civilization and isolation. We've mentioned the Great Wall in the context of Qin Shi Huang, but the structure we think of as the Great Wall is actually many walls built and rebuilt over centuries. States during the Warring States period built defensive walls along their borders. The Qin connected and extended these into a unified system. Subsequent dynasties, particularly the Han and Ming, rebuilt, extended, and modified the wall. The Ming Great Wall, built between the 14th and 17th centuries, is the most impressive and well-preserved section. Constructed of brick and stone rather than rammed earth, It features watchtowers, garrison stations, and beacon towers for signaling. The wall follows mountain ridges, crosses deserts, and traverses some of the most challenging terrain imaginable. But was the Great Wall effective? The historical record is mixed. It certainly slowed invasions and provided early warning through beacon signals. Garrison troops stationed along the wall could respond to small raids. But determined, well-organized invasions could breach it. The Mongols conquered China despite the wall, and the Manchu who founded the Qing dynasty entered through the Shanhai Pass when a Ming general opened the gate. The Great Wall functioned perhaps as much symbolically as militarily, a statement of where Chinese civilization ended and barbarian lands began, a massive assertion of state power and organizational capacity. Its construction required the labor of millions over centuries, representing enormous investment in defense and boundary making. The Grand Canal, connecting north and south. If the Great Wall runs east-west, the Grand Canal runs north-south, connecting the Yellow River with the Yangtze River and ultimately linking Beijing with Hangzhou over 1,100 miles. It's the longest canal in the world, and like the Great Wall, it was built in stages over centuries. The Grand Canal's origins lie in small canals dug during the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. The Sui dynasty, in one of its major achievements despite its brief duration, connected these canals into a unified system. The Tang maintained and improved it. The Yuan and Ming extended it to reach Beijing. The Grand Canal solved a critical problem for Chinese empires. The political and military center was in the north, particularly after the capital moved to Beijing, but the agricultural heartland was the Yangtze River Valley in the south. Transporting grain and other goods overland was slow and expensive. The canal allowed efficient bulk transport, feeding northern armies and cities with southern rice. Along the canal developed towns and cities servicing the trade. Canal maintenance required sophisticated engineering, locks, sluice gates, dredging, and shore reinforcement. Canal administration became a major component of imperial bureaucracy. The Grand Canal facilitated not just economic exchange but cultural communication between north and south. Portions of the Grand Canal remain in use today, carrying both cargo and tourists, a living testament to Chinese hydraulic engineering across millennia. The Forbidden City. Architecture of absolute power. The Forbidden City, built during the Yongle Emperor's reign 1406 to 1420, and refined by subsequent Ming and Qing emperors, represents the pinnacle of Chinese imperial architecture. Covering 180 acres in the heart of Beijing, it consists of nearly 1,000 buildings with around 9,000 rooms, all arranged according to strict cosmological and hierarchical principles. The complex is organized along a north-south axis, with the most important buildings in the center. You enter through the Meridian Gate, pass through multiple courtyards and gate buildings, each representing increasing proximity to imperial power. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, the largest building, was used for major ceremonies, coronations, royal weddings, military victories. The Hall of Central Harmony was for preparations before ceremonies. The Hall of Preserving Harmony hosted imperial examinations. Behind the ceremonial buildings are the inner courts, residential areas where the emperor, empress, concubines, and imperial family lived. Gardens provided recreational space. Administrative buildings housed the bureaucracy. Storehouses held treasures accumulated over centuries. The architecture uses wooden post and beam construction, allowing flexible interior space and resistance to earthquakes. Roofs are covered with yellow glazed tiles, yellow being the imperial color. Decorative elements, dragons, phoenixes, other mythological creatures, indicate rank and function. The number of such elements was strictly regulated. Only the emperor's buildings could have 9 dragons, as 9 was the most young number. The Forbidden City was closed to ordinary people, hence forbidden. Only officials with business, servants, eunuchs, and imperial family could enter. This isolation symbolized the emperor's transcendent position, separate from and above common humanity, an intermediary between heaven and earth. Zheng He's treasure ships. Naval supremacy not pursued. The treasure ships built for Zheng He's voyages during the early Ming dynasty represent China's maritime peak. Historical sources claim the largest ships were over 400 feet long and 180 feet wide, with 9 masts and crews of hundreds. Modern scholars debate whether ships this large were technically feasible, but even conservative estimates suggest ships around 200 to 250 feet long, still massive for the era. These ships used advanced Chinese naval technology: watertight bulkheads, compartments that could be sealed if one was breached, multiple masts allowing sophisticated sail arrangements, stern rudders for better steering, and magnetic compasses for navigation. The fleets included specialized ships, warships for protection, horse ships for cavalry mounts, supply ships and water tankers. Zheng He's voyages demonstrated Chinese naval capability and projected Ming power across the Indian Ocean. But after the Yongle Emperor's death, his successors ended the voyages. Multiple factors. Cost. The voyages were expensive spectacles. Confucian scholars' opposition to commercial contact with foreigners, threats from Mongol forces on the northern border requiring resources, and perhaps most importantly, China's self-conception as the center of civilization to which others should come, not vice versa. This decision had enormous historical consequences. Just as China withdrew from the seas, European powers were beginning voyages of exploration that would lead to colonial empires. By the 19th century, European naval technology had surpassed China's, and Western gunboats would force China to open its ports on humiliating terms. The contrast is striking. China had the technology for global maritime dominance in the early 15th century but chose not to pursue it. What might have happened if Zheng He's voyages had continued, if China had established trading posts across the Indian Ocean, if Chinese ships had rounded Africa and reached Europe? Such counterfactuals fascinate historians but ultimately emphasize the contingent nature of history. Choices, not inevitabilities, shaped the modern world. These inventions and engineering achievements, paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, silk, porcelain, the seismoscope, advanced metallurgy, the Great Wall, the Grand Canal, the Forbidden City, treasure ships, and countless others we haven't detailed, demonstrate that for much of history China was the world's most technologically advanced civilization. The question of why this leadership was not maintained, why China fell behind Europe during the early modern period, has occupied historians for generations and involves complex factors we'll explore later. For now, recognize that Chinese innovation profoundly shaped human history. The four great inventions alone, paper, printing, gunpowder, compass, transformed warfare, navigation, knowledge transmission, and administration globally. Chinese technologies spread along the Silk Road, through Arab intermediaries, to European hands where they were refined and sometimes turned back against China. If these achievements amaze you and you want to explore the mysteries and unanswered questions that still surround ancient China, stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're about to delve into the enigmas that continue to puzzle archaeologists, the lost technologies, the sealed tombs, and the debates that make Chinese history endlessly fascinating. Mysteries and enigmas. Every ancient civilization leaves puzzles for later generations to solve. China, with its vast geographic extent, long history, and reverence for burial traditions that sealed valuable information underground, offers particularly rich mysteries. Some have been partially solved. Others remain as enigmatic as when first discovered. Let us explore the questions that continue to captivate scholars and enthusiasts alike. The Xia dynasty, myth or history? For millennia, Chinese tradition held that the Xia dynasty, founded by the legendary Yu the Great around 2070 BCE, was China's first dynasty. The traditional narrative says Yu gained the throne through merit after successfully controlling the catastrophic floods that had plagued China. He established a hereditary monarchy, passing power to his son, and the Xia ruled for nearly 500 years before being overthrown by the Shang. Western scholars, lacking contemporary written records, long dismissed the Xia as legendary, a creation by later historians projecting political legitimacy backwards. After all, if the Shang, whose existence is verified by oracle bones, could be overthrown for misrule, then presenting an earlier precedent justified rebellion as response to loss of heaven's mandate. Then came Erlitou. As discussed earlier, this large archaeological site in Hunan province dates to approximately 1900 to 1500 BCE, precisely when the Xia supposedly existed. The site shows urban planning, bronze metallurgy, large palace foundations, and clear evidence of stratified society and state-level organization. But is Erlitou the Xia? This question divides archaeologists and historians. Some argue yes, the dating, location, and cultural characteristics match traditional Xia descriptions. Others contend Erlitou might represent an early Shang city or a separate culture altogether, not necessarily the Xia. The problem is the absence of written records at Erlitou, no inscriptions confirming the site's identity. Recent archaeological work at sites like Taosi and Shimao in northern China has complicated the picture further. These sites, also dating to roughly the Xia period, show sophisticated urban development and may represent competing polities. Perhaps the Xia was not a single unified dynasty but a network of related cultures, later simplified by tradition into a neat dynastic narrative. The mystery deepens with debates over the Xia's supposed control of bronze metallurgy. Bronze was the strategic technology of the age, like steel in the Industrial Revolution or microchips today. Control over bronze production meant military and economic advantage. If the Xia controlled bronze working, we should find evidence, but bronze artifacts from the Erlita period are relatively rare compared to the later Shang. Will we ever conclusively prove or disprove the Xia dynasty's existence? Perhaps if writing is found at Erlitu or a similar site, explicitly identifying it as Xia, the question would be settled. Until then, the Xia occupies an ambiguous zone between myth and history, probable but not proven, representing China's emergence into state-level organization but frustratingly elusive in specifics. The first emperor's tomb, rivers of mercury and eternal treasures. We've discussed the terracotta army guarding Qin Shi Huang's tomb, but the tomb itself remains unexcavated, its contents unknown. What does Sima Qian's description promise? An underground palace with a ceiling representing the heavens, pearls depicting stars and celestial bodies. A floor mapping the empire, with rivers of mercury mechanically flowing to represent the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Crossbows rigged to shoot anyone entering. The emperor's body surrounded by treasures, jade, gold, precious stones. And the workers who built it, sealed inside to preserve its secrets. But the tomb remains closed. What? Chinese authorities cite preservation concerns. When the terracotta army pits were opened, exposure to air caused the vibrant paint on the warriors to flake off within minutes. The loss was irreversible. Imagine what could happen to organic materials, pigments, or documents inside the main tomb chamber after 2,200 years of sealed preservation suddenly exposed to oxygen, moisture, and temperature changes. There's also the mercury issue. If rivers of mercury really flow in the tomb, opening it could release toxic vapors dangerous to excavators and potentially contaminating the surrounding area. Mercury poisoning is serious and potentially fatal. Ironic, given that mercury consumption may have killed the first emperor himself. What secrets wait in that tomb? Will we find historical documents correcting or confirming what we think we know about the Qin dynasty? Will there be maps showing territories we didn't know the Qin controlled? Could there be texts from the burning of books, supposedly destroyed, preserved in the tomb's sealed environment? What about the emperor's body? Could it be preserved, and what might forensic examination reveal about his death? Some scholars argue excavation should proceed carefully with modern techniques that could minimize damage. Others insist the tomb should remain sealed until technology advances further. The Chinese government has indicated the tomb will not be opened for the foreseeable future, a decision that frustrates some archaeologists but arguably shows wisdom and patience. So the first emperor lies still beneath Mount Li, surrounded by whatever wonders or horrors wait in his underground palace, the greatest unopened time capsule in Chinese archaeology. The terracotta army, manufacturing mysteries. Even the excavated portions of the first emperor's complex raise questions. How were the terracotta warriors manufactured? The usual answer involves workshops using standardized molds for bodies, arms, legs, and heads, then individually sculpting faces and details. But the scale challenges this explanation. Over 8,000 warriors, each unique, produced in perhaps 30 to 40 years. Modern attempts to replicate the warriors using ancient techniques struggle to match the original's quality. The terracotta mixture needs precise clay composition to avoid cracking during firing. The kills must reach high temperatures evenly. How were the life-sized and larger pieces successfully fired without breaking? What were the organizational structures that coordinated production across multiple workshops? The warriors originally held real bronze weapons: swords, spears, halberds, crossbows. When excavated, some bronze weapons were found in perfect condition, their edges still sharp after 2,200 years. Analysis revealed they'd been treated with chromium compounds to prevent corrosion, a technology Europe wouldn't develop until the 19th century. How did Qin craftsmen discover this technique? Was it accidental or deliberate? And where are all the weapons? Most are missing, presumably looted when the tomb complex was raided during the chaos following the Qin dynasty's collapse. The warrior's paint presents another mystery. Originally brightly painted in reds, blues, greens, purples, and other colors, most paint has flaked off. But on some warriors, preserved fragments show incredible detail: individual eyelashes, elaborate armor decorations, patterns on clothing. The pigments were bound with lacquer or protein-based mediums. Reconstructing the complete original appearance requires painstaking analysis of thousands of tiny paint fragments. And what lies in the parts of the complex not yet excavated? Ground surveys suggest more pits, some possibly containing cavalry, chariots, officials, musicians, and acrobats. Each excavation reveals new details about Qin dynasty craftsmanship, organization, and beliefs. The terracotta army isn't just guarding the emperor, it's guarding secrets about how the ancient Chinese state mobilized resources and labor on unprecedented scales. Oracle bone script. What remains undeciphered? Oracle bone script, the earliest fully developed Chinese writing, has been substantially deciphered, allowing us to read Shang dynasty divination records. But substantial portions remain unclear. Of the roughly 5,000 different characters identified on oracle bones, scholars can confidently read only about 1,500. The rest are unknown, their meanings lost. Why can't we decipher the remaining characters? Several factors complicate the task. Many characters appear only once or a few times, making pattern recognition difficult. Some may be names of people, places, or deities unknown from other sources. Some might be variant forms of known characters. Others could represent words or concepts that disappeared from the Chinese language. Decipherment proceeds through several methods: comparing oracle bone characters with later Chinese scripts to trace evolution, analyzing context where characters appear, identifying semantic radicals, meaning components, and phonetic components, and comparing with inscriptions on Shang bronze vessels which sometimes overlap with oracle bone texts. Every decipherment reveals new historical information. Recently deciphered oracle bones have confirmed military campaigns, revealed religious rituals, identified Shang royal family relationships, and documented natural disasters. But the undeciphered portion may hold even more valuable secrets about Shang society, beliefs, and events. Will we ever decipher all oracle bone characters? Perhaps not, especially rare characters appearing only once. But ongoing research, improved techniques, and new oracle bone discoveries continue to push back the boundaries of our ignorance. Lost technologies and knowledge. Chinese historical texts reference technologies and knowledge that seem to have been lost, leaving us to puzzle over how they worked or whether they existed at all. The south-pointing chariot was supposedly a mechanical device with a figure on top that always pointed south regardless of the cart's direction. Descriptions suggest a differential gear mechanism that kept the figure oriented through the chariot's movements. Was this real or legendary? Modern reconstructions using differential gears can replicate the described function, suggesting it's mechanically feasible. But no ancient examples survive, leaving uncertainty. Chinese alchemy supposedly produced various elixirs with remarkable properties: longevity drugs, poison antidotes, gold from base metals. Most were likely ineffective or, in the case of mercury-based elixirs, actively harmful. But some alchemical knowledge might have produced useful chemical results. The invention of gunpowder emerged from alchemical experimentation. Did other alchemical processes discover chemical reactions or compounds that were later forgotten? Ancient Chinese astronomical knowledge is another area of mystery. Han Dynasty astronomers compiled detailed star catalogs and recorded supernovae, sunspots, and comets with remarkable precision. Some of this knowledge was preserved, but some appears lost. Medieval Chinese astronomers sometimes consulted ancient texts describing observational techniques or instruments that they could no longer replicate or fully understand. Undiscovered imperial tombs. The first emperor's tomb is famous, but it's far from the only unexcavated imperial tomb. China's landscape holds dozens of imperial burial sites, some explored, many not. Each potentially contains treasures, documents, and information about the dynasty it represents. The tomb of Emperor Wu of Han, for instance, remains unopened. What might it contain about the emperor who expanded China to its greatest extent, established Confucianism as state ideology, and opened the Silk Road? The tomb of Empress Wu Zetian and her husband Emperor Gaozong is another fascinating unopened site. What treasures and records of the only female emperor's controversial reign might be sealed inside? Many Tang dynasty imperial tombs remain unexcavated. Given the Tang's cultural sophistication and international connections, their tombs might contain foreign goods, religious artifacts, and documents shedding light on this cosmopolitan era. Some Tang tombs that have been excavated, like the tomb of Princess Yong Tai, contain magnificent wall paintings depicting court life with incredible detail. What awaits in the larger imperial tombs? Ming dynasty tombs at the Ming Tombs site near Beijing have been partially explored. The tomb of the Wanli Emperor was excavated in the 1950s, yielding spectacular artifacts but also suffering damage due to inadequate preservation techniques. This experience reinforced Chinese authorities' caution about excavating other tombs. The tombs of other Ming emperors remain sealed, waiting for technology that can preserve their contents safely. The Qing dynasty emperors' tombs have been heavily looted over the years, but some subsidiary tombs remain unexplored. What might they reveal about the Qing court, their synthesis of Manchu and Han culture, and the dynasty's eventual decline? The mystery of Chinese isolation. Perhaps the deepest mystery is not archaeological but historical. Why did China, despite technological superiority for much of history, eventually fall behind Europe in science, technology, and economic development? This question, known as the Needham question, after the scholar Joseph Needham who articulated it, has generated enormous scholarly debate. Various theories have been proposed. Political structure. China's unified empire under bureaucratic centralization may have stifled innovation compared to Europe's competing states, where rulers competed to adopt new technologies for military and economic advantage. Economic factors. China's vast internal market and sophisticated but tradition-bound economy may have reduced incentives for revolutionary innovation, whereas European merchants and manufacturers faced pressures driving technological change. Cultural factors. Confucian ideology valued classical learning and moral cultivation over technical innovation. Scholars pursued government positions through mastery of ancient texts, not scientific investigation. Merchants and artisans who might drive innovation had low social status. Geographic factors. China's geographic unity and the Grand Canal's efficiency in moving goods reduced transportation innovation pressure, whereas Europe's fragmented geography encouraged maritime technology development. Decision factors. Specific choices like ending Zheng He's voyages, turning away from maritime exploration, and implementing restrictions on foreign trade, limited China's engagement with global trade and technology exchange. The reality likely involves multiple factors interacting in complex ways. China didn't suddenly fall behind, it was a gradual process over centuries, imperceptible to contemporaries, becoming obvious only when 19th-century European military and economic power overwhelmed the Qing dynasty. Understanding why China's earlier technological leadership wasn't maintained helps us appreciate how contingent historical development is. There was nothing inevitable about European global dominance, it resulted from specific historical circumstances, choices, and chance events. Similarly, China's current re-emergence as a global power demonstrates that historical trajectories can reverse. These mysteries, the Xia dynasty's existence, the first emperor's unopened tomb, lost technologies, undeciphered oracle bones, unexplored imperial tombs, and the great historical question of China's path, remind us that history is never fully known. Each generation of scholars, armed with new technologies and perspectives, uncovers more of the past while simultaneously discovering how much remains unknown. The incomplete nature of historical knowledge isn't a failure, it's what makes history endlessly fascinating. Each archaeological discovery, each deciphered inscription, each new analysis of ancient artifacts adds pieces to an infinitely complex puzzle. And even when we think we understand, new evidence can overturn long-held certainties. These enigmas keep ancient China alive in scholarly and popular imagination. They inspire archaeologists to continue excavating, historians to keep researching, and the public to remain fascinated by this ancient civilization whose influence echoes through our present. As we've explored China's golden ages, technological marvels, and enduring mysteries, you might be wondering, how did such a magnificent civilization decline? How did the empire that gave the world paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass end up subordinated to European powers who had been comparatively backward for much of history? That's the story we turn to next, the long decline of imperial China and the forces, internal and external, that brought it down. Make sure you're subscribed because this next chapter reveals how even the mightiest civilizations can fall, and the lessons remain painfully relevant today. The long decline, late imperial China, internal strife and foreign conquests. The story of China's decline is not one of sudden collapse but of erosion. Slow, relentless, across centuries, until the structure that had seemed eternal crumbled in the face of internal rebellion and external pressure. This is the story of the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, each facing challenges that eventually proved overwhelming. The Yuan dynasty, Mongol rule and Chinese resentment. We've discussed Kublai Khan's conquest and the Yuan dynasty he established. But Yuan rule, despite attempts at synthesis between Mongol and Chinese cultures, remained fundamentally exploitative and ultimately unstable. The Mongols maintained their ethnic hierarchy, Mongols at the top, Central Asian allies, Simu people, next, Northern Chinese, Hanren, below them, and Southern Chinese, Nanren, the last to be conquered, at the bottom. This ethnic stratification created resentment. Talented Chinese scholars found advancement blocked by their ethnicity. Heavy taxation funded Mongol military campaigns and lavish court expenditures. The Yuan's military adventures beyond China were mostly failures. 2 attempts to invade Japan in 1274 and 1281 ended in disaster. The second destroyed by a typhoon the Japanese called kamikaze, divine wind. Campaigns in Southeast Asia against Annam, Kampa, and Java achieved little at great cost. These failures drained resources without expanding the empire or generating revenue. Within China, massive hydraulic engineering projects, canals, dikes, irrigation systems, required maintenance but were neglected as Yuan rule weakened. The Yellow River, always prone to catastrophic floods, broke its dikes repeatedly, devastating northern China's agricultural heartland. Famine followed floods. Peasants, already heavily taxed, faced starvation. By the 1350s, China was in chaos. Secret societies like the White Lotus and Red Turbans mobilized resentment against Yuan rule, combining religious millenarianism with political rebellion. Various rebel leaders emerged, fighting the Mongols and each other. From this chaos emerged Zhu Yuanzhang, a peasant who had become a Buddhist monk and then a rebel commander. Zhu Yuanzhang proved a brilliant military and political leader. He defeated rival rebels, captured the Yuan capital Dadu in 1368, and proclaimed the Ming dynasty. The last Yuan emperor fled north to Mongolia. Mongol rule in China ended after less than a century, but Mongol power remained a threat on the northern frontiers for generations. The Ming dynasty, restoration and eventual stagnation. The Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, represented Chinese restoration after Mongol rule. Zhu Yuanzhang, the Hongwu emperor, was determined to rebuild Chinese power and eliminate Mongol influence. He established a highly centralized autocracy, making himself accessible to no one, trusting few, and ruling through fear. The Hongwu emperor's paranoia led to periodic purges of officials suspected of disloyalty or corruption. Tens of thousands were executed during his reign. He abolished the office of chancellor to concentrate power in his own hands. He created a vast network of informants and secret police. Yet he also implemented reforms to help peasants, redistributing land, lowering taxes initially, promoting agriculture. The early Ming was a period of vigor. The Yongle emperor, Hongwu's son who seized power from his nephew, sponsored Zheng He's maritime expeditions, rebuilt Beijing as the capital, commissioned massive literary projects, and expanded Ming control into Mongolia and Vietnam. This was the Ming at its height, powerful, confident, expansive. But after Yongle's death, Ming emperors gradually became less effective. The decision to end Zheng He's voyages symbolized a broader turn inward. Ming China became increasingly isolated, suspicious of foreign contact, focused on defending existing borders rather than expansion. The Ming faced constant pressure on the northern border from Mongol tribes and later from the rising Manchu people in Manchuria. Defending the border required massive resources. The Great Wall was extensively rebuilt during the Ming. The brick and stone construction we see today is largely Ming work, a massive investment attempting to keep nomadic invaders out. But walls cannot solve political and economic problems. The Ming government became increasingly corrupt. Eunuchs gained enormous power, controlling access to emperors who often preferred the pleasures of the Forbidden City's inner chambers to the tedious work of governance. Factions fought for influence. Tax revenues were embezzled. Military forces weakened. The examination system, meant to recruit talented officials, became ossified. Success required mastery of the eight-legged essay, a rigidly formalized writing style that tested conformity to convention rather than creative thinking or practical ability. Scholars spent years memorizing Confucian classics and practicing essay composition according to strict rules, learning little about administration, economics, or military affairs. The late Ming economy struggled with inflation caused partly by massive silver imports from Spanish America via Manila galleons. Silver flowed into China to purchase silk, porcelain, and tea, disrupting the domestic economy. Peasants faced increasing tax burdens as the government's need for revenue grew. Land concentration in the hands of wealthy families created a mass of landless peasants vulnerable to recruitment by rebels. Environmental disasters compounded human failures. The 17th century saw a period of global cooling, the Little Ice Age, that shortened growing seasons, reduced harvests, and contributed to famines. Northwest China was particularly affected, with crop failures driving desperate peasants to rebellion. In the 1630s and 1640s, major rebellions erupted. Li Zicheng, a former minor official turned rebel leader, built a massive army from disaffected peasants and deserters from Ming forces. In 1644, Li's forces captured Beijing. The Chongzhen Emperor, the last Ming emperor, hanged himself on a hill behind the Forbidden City as rebel forces entered the capital. But Li Zicheng would not establish a new dynasty. His forces, undisciplined and engaged in looting Beijing, were unprepared for what came next. The Qing dynasty, Manchu conquest and the last dynasty. The Manchu people, originally from Manchuria northeast of the Great Wall, had been building a powerful state during the late Ming. In 1644, as Li Zicheng's rebels occupied Beijing, a Ming general named Wu Sangue faced a terrible choice: fight the rebels with inadequate forces, or invite the Manchu army through the Shanhai Pass to help suppress the rebellion. Wu Sangue chose the latter. Manchu forces entered China, defeated Li Zicheng and then refused to leave. The Manchu leader proclaimed the Qing dynasty, claiming they were restoring order after Ming collapse and avenging the Ming emperor's death. Ming loyalists resisted for decades, particularly in the south, but gradually the Qing consolidated control over all China. The Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1912, represents a paradox. The Manchu were foreign conquerors, yet they ruled China longer than many native Han dynasties. How did they achieve this? Through a careful balance, maintaining Manchu identity and military supremacy while adopting Chinese governance systems and respecting Chinese culture. The Manchu maintained ethnic segregation to some degree. Han Chinese men were required to wear the Q hairstyle, shaved forehead, long braid, as a sign of submission. Initially, resistance to the Q was punished by death. Manchu and Mongol units formed the core of the military banners. Intermarriage between Manchu and Han was restricted. Key government positions were divided between Manchu and Han officials. Yet the Qing also presented themselves as legitimate Chinese emperors. They performed traditional rituals, patronized Confucian scholarship, and governed through the existing bureaucracy. Early Qing emperors, particularly Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, were hard-working, competent rulers who maintained order and prosperity. The Kangxi Emperor, R. 1661 to 1722, was one of China's longest-reigning and most capable emperors. He suppressed the revolt of the three feudatories, conquered Taiwan from Ming loyalists, pushed back Russian expansion into Manchuria through the Treaty of Nerchinsk, and expanded Qing control into Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang. He was intellectually curious, studying mathematics and astronomy with Jesuit missionaries, compiling massive reference works, and governing with skill and attention to detail. The Qianlong Emperor, R. 1735 to 1796, presided over what seemed to be China's height. The empire reached its greatest territorial extent. The population boomed. Arts and culture flourished. China appeared wealthy, powerful, and stable. Yet beneath this prosperity, problems were accumulating. Population growth outpaced agricultural expansion, putting pressure on resources. Government corruption spread. The Qianlong Emperor's favorite, Hushin, accumulated wealth through extortion and embezzlement on a massive scale. The military, victorious in earlier campaigns, grew complacent. And China's understanding of the changing global order was dangerously inadequate. Qianlong's response to King George III's letter reveals the Qing worldview. China had no need for British goods, trade was a privilege China granted to barbarians who desired Chinese products, and Britain should be grateful for whatever access was permitted. This attitude, which might have been sustainable when China was in fact more advanced than Europe, was catastrophically wrong by the late 18th century. The Industrial Revolution was transforming Europe. British factories were mechanizing production. European militaries were developing more effective firearms and artillery. European powers were establishing colonial empires and accumulating wealth from global trade. China, still powerful in absolute terms, was falling relatively behind in technology, military effectiveness, and understanding of global economics and power dynamics. The Opium Wars and the Century of Humiliation. The collision between Qing China and industrialized Europe came in the form of opium. British merchants, frustrated by limited access to Chinese markets and a trade deficit caused by British demand for Chinese tea and China's disinterest in British goods, found a product Chinese consumers wanted: opium. Opium had been used in China for centuries for medicinal purposes, but British importation transformed it into a mass consumer good. Opium addiction spread, particularly in coastal provinces. Silver flowed out of China to pay for opium, reversing the traditional trade surplus. The Qing government recognized opium's destructive effects and attempted to ban the trade. In 1839, Commissioner Lin Zexu was sent to Canton, Guangzhou, to suppress opium smuggling. He confiscated and destroyed massive quantities of opium belonging to British merchants. The British government, claiming insult to national honor and property rights, sent a military expedition. The First Opium War 1839 to 1842 exposed the gap between Qing and British military capabilities. British warships, equipped with modern artillery and steam power, easily defeated Qing naval forces. British troops with modern rifles and discipline overwhelmed larger Qing armies. The Qing, humiliatingly, were forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing 1842, the first of what Chinese call the unequal treaties. The Treaty of Nanjing ceded Hong Kong to Britain, opened 5 ports to British trade, established fixed tariffs limiting Qing revenue from foreign trade, and required massive indemnity payments. It established extraterritoriality, meaning British subjects in China were subject to British, not Chinese law, an infringement on sovereignty that symbolized China's reduced status. The Second Opium War 1856 to 1860 brought further humiliation. British and French forces, supported by Russia and the United States pressuring for favorable treaties, defeated Qing forces again. Foreign troops occupied Beijing, burning the magnificent Summer Palace in retaliation for Chinese treatment of prisoners and negotiators. The emperor fled. More ports were opened, foreign diplomats were established in Beijing, and China was forced to legalize opium. These wars and treaties shattered the Qing dynasty's legitimacy and China's self-conception. For millennia, China had viewed itself as the civilized center of the world, culturally superior to all others. Now foreign barbarians had defeated China militarily and dictated terms. The psychological impact was profound. Internal rebellions, the Taiping Nian and Muslim uprisings. As if foreign pressure weren't enough, the Qing faced massive internal rebellions in the mid-19th century. The Taiping Rebellion 1850 to 1864 was one of history's bloodiest conflicts, with death tolls estimated between 20 and 30 million people. More than died in World War I. The Taiping was led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ sent to establish a heavenly kingdom on earth. His movement combined Christianity, learned from Protestant missionaries, with traditional Chinese elements and revolutionary social policies. The Taiping captured Nanjing, made it their capital and controlled much of southern China for over a decade. Taiping policies were radical for their time. Land redistribution, gender equality including female military officers, banning foot binding, opium and alcohol, and attempting to overthrow Confucian social hierarchy. But the movement was also characterized by internal conflicts, military excesses and inability to establish effective governance. The Qing eventually suppressed the Taiping through a combination of factors. Regional armies led by Han Chinese officials like Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang, the Qing's own military banners proved inadequate. Foreign assistance, Western powers, deciding a Qing government was preferable to an unstable Taiping regime, provided modern weapons and even military advisors, and Taiping internal divisions. But the cost was staggering. Whole regions devastated, millions dead, the Qing government's financial and military weakness exposed. Simultaneously, the Nian Rebellion in northern China 1851 to 1868, and Muslim rebellions in Yunnan and the northwest 1850s to 1870s, further destabilized the empire. These rebellions revealed that the Qing government had lost effective control over large portions of its territory and depended on regional strongmen and foreign support for survival. Self-strengthening and failed reforms. After the rebellions were suppressed, Qing officials recognized that China needed modernization to survive. The self-strengthening movement, 1860s to 1890s, attempted to adopt Western military technology and industrial techniques while preserving Chinese cultural values, summarized as Chinese learning for essence, Western learning for practical application. Arsenals were built to produce modern rifles and artillery. Shipyards constructed steam-powered warships. Telegraph lines and railways were slowly introduced. Students were sent abroad to study Western science and technology. The Qing government attempted to build a modern navy. But the self-strengthening movement faced fundamental limitations. It attempted to adopt Western technology while resisting institutional and ideological changes. Conservative officials opposed reforms as foreign contamination. Funding was limited and often embezzled. The examination system continued to test Confucian classical knowledge rather than practical skills, meaning government officials lacked technical understanding. The First Sino-Japanese War 1894 to 1895 exposed the self-strengthening movement's failure. Japan, which had undergone comprehensive modernization during the Meiji Restoration, decisively defeated Qing forces. China's supposedly modern navy was destroyed. Taiwan and Korea were lost. The indemnity payment was crushing. The humiliation of defeat by Japan, a country China had historically viewed as inferior, was profound. Following this defeat, reformers argued that superficial modernization was insufficient. China needed fundamental political and social reform. The 100 Days Reform of 1898, supported by the young Guangxu Emperor, attempted to implement comprehensive changes: educational reform, government restructuring, legal reform, and economic modernization. But the reforms threatened entrenched interests, particularly the conservative faction led by the Empress Dowager Cixi. After only 103 days, Cixi staged a coup, placed the emperor under house arrest, and executed or exiled the reformers. The opportunity for peaceful reform from within the system was lost. The Boxer Rebellion and foreign occupation. Popular resentment against foreign influence culminated in the Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901. The Boxers, a peasant movement practicing martial arts and claiming magical immunity to bullets, targeted foreign missionaries, Chinese Christian converts, and foreign property. The movement was anti-modern and xenophobic, blaming China's problems on foreign contamination. Initially uncertain, the Qing government eventually supported the Boxers, declaring war on foreign powers. The result was predictable: an 8-nation alliance: Britain, France, Germany, Russia, United States, Japan, Italy, Austria-Hungary, sent troops that easily defeated Boxer forces and captured Beijing. The Empress Dowager fled in disguise. The Boxer Protocol, 1901, imposed another humiliating settlement: massive indemnity, to be paid over 39 years with interest, execution of officials who had supported the Boxers, permanent stationing of foreign troops in Beijing, and further restrictions on Chinese sovereignty. China in 1901 was a shell of the great empire it had been a century earlier. Foreign powers controlled treaty ports and extraterritorial concessions in major cities. China's tariff autonomy was compromised. Foreign troops were stationed in the capital. The government was bankrupt, paying massive indemnities while trying to maintain basic functions. Regional warlords held real power in many areas. The fall of the Qing and end of imperial rule. The Qing dynasty's last decade saw desperate attempts at reform. The examination system was finally abolished in 1905, though this eliminated the traditional route to officialdom without creating effective replacements. Constitutional reforms were promised, with a transition to constitutional monarchy planned. Provincial assemblies were established. A modern army was trained. But these reforms were too little, too late. Revolutionary movements, particularly the one led by Sun Yat-sen, called for the overthrow of the Qing and establishment of a republic. Anti-Manchu sentiment grew. Revolutionaries argued that China's humiliation resulted from foreign Manchu rule, and only Han Chinese government could restore national dignity. In October 1911, a military uprising in Wuchang spiraled into a broader revolution. Province after province declared independence from the Qing. The court, desperate, recalled Yuan Shikai, the most powerful military leader, and granted him extensive power to suppress the rebellion. Instead, Yuan negotiated with revolutionaries, forcing the abdication of the 6-year-old Xiantong Emperor, Puyi, in February 1912. The Qing dynasty ended not with dramatic battle but with quiet abdication. The last emperor, a child who didn't understand what was happening, signed documents ending over 2,000 years of imperial rule. China became a republic, though the republic would immediately face challenges: warlordism, foreign invasion, civil war, that would plague it for decades. The fall of the Qing marked the end of not just a dynasty but of an entire political and cultural system. The emperor-centered worldview, the Confucian social hierarchy, the examination system, the tribute system in foreign relations, all ended or fundamentally transformed. China entered the 20th century traumatized, humiliated, and searching for a new identity and path forward. The story of late imperial China's decline is a cautionary tale about how even powerful civilizations can fall when they fail to adapt to changing circumstances. The Qing dynasty's inability to reform fundamentally until too late, the conservative resistance to necessary changes, the corruption and inefficiency that paralyzed government, and the failure to understand shifting global power dynamics all contributed to China's century of humiliation. But this is not where China's story ends. It's a low point from which recovery, though long and painful, would eventually come. The People's Republic of China, established in 1949, and particularly the economic reforms beginning in 1978, represent China's re-emergence as a major power, though that story lies beyond ancient history. For our purposes, The fall of the Qing brings us to the end of the imperial era we've been exploring. From the Neolithic villages of the Yellow River Valley to the abdication of the last emperor, we've traced 4,000 years of civilization. Its triumphs and failures, its brilliance and brutality, its enduring achievements and tragic collapses. Now, in our final chapter, let us consider the legacy of ancient China, what it contributed to human civilization, how it influences our present, and why its story matters. Legacy and conclusion. We have journeyed through 4 millennia of Chinese civilization, from Neolithic farmers painting pottery to emperors commanding millions, from the first bronzes cast at Erlitou to the treasure ships of Zheng He, from the unification under Qin Shi Huang to the humiliation of the Opium Wars. Now, as our exploration nears its end, we must ask, what does it all mean? Why does this ancient civilization, which rose and fell through countless dynasties, still matter in our modern world? Cultural continuity and identity. China is unique among ancient civilizations in its cultural continuity. Egypt was conquered by Greeks, Romans, Arabs, each conquest bringing new language, religion, and culture until the connection with pharaonic civilization became archaeological rather than living. Mesopotamia's great civilizations disappeared entirely, their languages dead, their cities buried, their very existence forgotten until 19th century archaeologists excavated them. But China, despite invasions, conquests, periods of disunion, and the ending of imperial rule, maintained remarkable cultural continuity. The Chinese language evolved but remained intelligible. Educated Chinese today can read classical texts with training. Confucian values, though challenged and sometimes rejected, continued to influence thinking about society and governance. The writing system, despite simplification reforms, retains connection to its ancient origins. Chinese people today see themselves as inheritors of this 4,000-year tradition. This continuity has profound psychological and political implications. It gives Chinese civilization a sense of permanence and resilience. Empires rose and fell, foreign peoples conquered and were absorbed, dynasties came and went, but Chinese civilization endured. This history informs how modern China sees itself and its place in the world. The memory of the century of humiliation, the period from the Opium Wars to the Communist victory in 1949 when China was weak and exploited by foreign powers, remains powerful in Chinese political consciousness. The desire to restore China to its historical position as a leading civilization drives much of its modern development strategy. Understanding ancient China's achievements and its eventual relative decline helps us understand modern China's ambitions and concerns. Contributions to human civilization. Chinese civilization's concrete contributions to human progress are staggering. The 4 great inventions alone transformed the world. Paper revolutionized information storage and transmission. Before paper, knowledge was limited by the cost and difficulty of writing materials. After paper, books became more accessible, literacy could spread more broadly, and accumulated knowledge could be preserved more reliably. The European Renaissance and Enlightenment would have been impossible without paper. Printing made mass production of texts feasible, democratizing knowledge further. While Europe would adapt the concept to movable type printing most effectively, the fundamental idea came from China. The transformation of Europe after Gutenberg, Protestant Reformation, scientific revolution, growth of literacy, all depended on printing technology pioneered in China. Gunpowder transformed warfare, ending the dominance of armored cavalry and fortified castles, enabling European colonial expansion, and ultimately making mass warfare deadlier than ever imagined. For better or worse, gunpowder weapons reshaped global power dynamics. The compass enabled oceanic navigation, making possible the voyages of exploration that connected the world. European discovery of the Americas, the circumnavigation of Africa, the establishment of global trade networks, all required navigation technologies pioneered in China. Beyond the 4 great inventions, Chinese contributions include porcelain, which influenced European ceramics and remained a major trade good; silk, which created the trade routes connecting East and West; cast iron and steel-making techniques that advanced metallurgy; the seismoscope and advanced astronomical observations; the Grand Canal and other hydraulic engineering demonstrating state organizational capacity; acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, controversial in effectiveness but representing sophisticated observational attempts to understand health; the examination system, which influenced the development of meritocracy and civil service systems; worldwide philosophical systems, Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, that offer alternative perspectives on governance, ethics, and humanity's place in the cosmos. Lessons from the rise and fall of dynasties. The dynastic cycle, The pattern of dynasties rising through capability and falling through corruption and incompetence offers lessons about power, governance, and societal change. The mandate of heaven concept, though originally political theology, contains insight. Governments that fail to serve their people lose legitimacy. The pattern repeats. A dynasty consolidates power, governs effectively for generations, accumulates wealth and culture, then decays through corruption, incompetence, or ossification. Rebellions emerge, civil war destroys the old order, and a new dynasty emerges claiming heaven's mandate. This cycle raises questions relevant to any civilization. How do we maintain institutional effectiveness over time? How do we balance stability with necessary adaptation? How do we prevent power from corrupting and bureaucracies from ossifying? How do we reform systems peacefully before they collapse violently? China's late imperial decline offers particularly relevant lessons. The Qing dynasty's failure to reform fundamentally until too late, its misunderstanding of changing global dynamics, its inability to adapt institutions to new challenges. These failures echo in modern concerns about whether current powers can adapt to rapid technological and geopolitical change. The question of innovation and development. The Needham question, why China, despite earlier technological superiority, fell behind Europe in science, technology, and economic development, has implications beyond Chinese history. It forces us to ask, what conditions enable sustained innovation? What factors can cause technological leaders to lose their advantage? Various proposed answers: centralized versus competitive political systems, cultural attitudes toward innovation, economic incentives, geographic factors, specific policy choices, all suggest that technological and economic development are not inevitable but depend on complex interactions of many factors. This history also challenges simple narratives of progress. For much of human history, China was more advanced than Europe. European dominance from roughly 1500 to 2000 was an aberration in long-term perspective, not an inevitable outcome of inherent superiority. The current re-emergence of China as a major economic and technological power represents, in some ways, a reversion to historical norms. Influence on art, literature, and aesthetics. Chinese art and aesthetics have profoundly influenced global culture. Chinese landscape painting, with its emphasis on capturing the essence of nature rather than photorealistic reproduction, influenced both Asian art traditions and later European artists exposed to Chinese works. The idea that art should evoke philosophical contemplation rather than merely please the eye shaped artistic thinking worldwide. Chinese poetry, particularly from the Tang dynasty, is recognized as among the finest in any language. The works of Li Bai, Du Fu, and others continue to be translated, studied, and appreciated globally. The compression of meaning into brief, evocative lines, a characteristic of Chinese poetry, influenced modernist poets in the West. Chinese ceramics influenced European pottery and porcelain production. The clean lines and proportions of Chinese architecture influenced global architectural thinking. Traditional Chinese gardens, with their emphasis on naturalistic composition and symbolic meaning, shaped landscape design. Even Chinese cuisine's influence is global. Woks, chopsticks, tea culture, specific dishes, and cooking techniques spread worldwide, adapting to local tastes while retaining recognizable Chinese characteristics. Philosophical and ethical contributions. Confucianism, despite criticism for reinforcing hierarchy and discouraging individualism, offers valuable perspectives on social ethics, governance, and education. The Confucian emphasis on virtue and leadership, the responsibility of rulers to serve the people, the importance of education and moral development, and the cultivation of proper relationships. These ideas remain relevant. Taoist philosophy, with its emphasis on naturalness, spontaneity, and harmony with the cosmos, offers counterbalance to modern society's emphasis on control, productivity, and endless growth. The Taoist skepticism toward excessive organization and artificial structures resonates with modern concerns about over-bureaucratization and loss of authentic human experience. Even legalism, despite its authoritarian harshness, poses important questions about how to maintain order in large societies and whether moral exhortation alone is sufficient for governance. The legalist emphasis on clear laws uniformly enforced influenced thinking about rule of law, though legalism's extreme versions rightly remain cautionary examples of totalitarianism. Modern China and ancient legacy. The People's Republic of China, established in 1949, initially attempted to break from the past. The Communist Revolution was explicitly anti-traditional, attacking Confucianism as feudal, destroying temples and artifacts during the Cultural Revolution, and attempting to create a new socialist society free from old thinking. Yet ancient influences proved resilient. As China opened up economically in the 1980s and after, there was renewed interest in traditional culture. Confucius, once condemned, was rehabilitated. Traditional arts were revived. The government itself drew on historical legitimacy, presenting the Communist Party as continuing China's long tradition of unified governance. Modern Chinese nationalism draws heavily on ancient glories. The desire to restore China to great power status is framed as returning to its natural position as a leading civilization. The Belt and Road Initiative echoes the ancient Silk Road. Chinese soft power promotion emphasizes 5,000 years of civilization. The message is clear: China was great, was humiliated, and is now resuming its rightful place. Understanding ancient Chinese history is thus essential for understanding modern China. Its self-perception, its ambitions, its sensitivities about sovereignty and respect, and its trajectory going forward. Enduring mysteries and ongoing research. Even as we conclude, remember that the story of ancient China is not finished being written. Archaeologists continue to excavate new sites. Historians find new interpretations of existing evidence. Technologies like DNA analysis, isotope studies, and advanced imaging reveal information invisible to previous generations of scholars. The first emperor's tomb may someday be opened, revealing whatever treasures and secrets wait inside. More oracle bones may be discovered and deciphered. Underwater archaeology may reveal ancient shipwrecks with cargo telling us about trade networks. Undiscovered cities may be found, particularly in China's vast interior regions less thoroughly explored than coastal areas. Each discovery has the potential to overturn or refine our understanding. History is not fixed but constantly evolving as new evidence emerges and new perspectives are brought to bear. Part 22. Why Ancient China Matters to Everyone. Even if you have no direct connection to Chinese civilization, its history offers universal lessons and inspirations. It demonstrates humanity's capacity for creating sophisticated cultures and technologies with resources far more limited than we enjoy today. It shows how civilizations can endure for millennia through adaptation and resilience. It illustrates the complexities of governance, the challenges of maintaining institutions over time, and the consequences of failure to reform. It provides alternative models of social organization, ethics, and aesthetics that can expand our thinking beyond purely Western frameworks. It reminds us that global power dynamics shift over time and that today's arrangements are not permanent or inevitable. It offers cautionary tales about overconfidence, isolation, resistance to change, and misunderstanding of changing circumstances. Final reflections. We began this journey beside the Yellow River, with Neolithic farmers who could not have imagined what their descendants would build. We watched civilizations emerge from those villages, the mysterious Xia, the bronze-working Shang, the feudal Zhou. We witnessed the chaos of the warring states and the birth of philosophies that would shape millennia. We stood with the first emperor as he unified China and built his underground army. We explored the Han dynasty's expansion and cultural flowering. We witnessed Tang cosmopolitanism and Song innovation. We met legendary rulers, from ruthless Qin Shi Huang to brilliant Tang Taizong to unprecedented Wu Zetian. We examined the inventions that changed the world: paper, printing, gunpowder, compass, and the engineering marvels like the Great Wall and Grand Canal. We grappled with mysteries that remain unsolved: the first emperor's sealed tomb, undeciphered oracle bones, lost technologies. And we traced the long decline from imperial splendor to humiliation at foreign hands, understanding how even mighty civilizations can fall. Through it all, we've seen humanity at its best and worst: brilliant creativity and brutal tyranny, sophisticated philosophy and crushing social hierarchy, technological innovation and resistance to necessary change, magnificent art and terrible violence. Chinese civilization's story is ultimately a human story. It shows what we're capable of achieving and what can go wrong. It demonstrates that history is made by human choices, by emperors who choose wisdom or cruelty, by officials who choose service or corruption, by peoples who choose adaptation or stagnation. As we stand in the present, looking back at ancient China, we can draw inspiration from its achievements and warnings from its failures. We can appreciate its contributions to our shared human heritage. And we can recognize that civilizations, like the individuals who compose them, are always works in progress. Never finished, always facing new challenges, always choosing what to preserve and what to change. The terracotta warriors still stand in their pits, guarding a tomb that may never be opened. The Great Wall still winds across mountain ridges, a testament to human determination and state power. The Forbidden City still dominates central Beijing, though now as a museum rather than imperial residence. And the Yellow River still flows, as it has for millions of years, through the lands where Chinese civilization first emerged. These physical remnants connect us to ancient China, not as dead history but as living heritage, as part of the continuum of human achievement and struggle that connects our present to the deepest past and extends into an unknown future. If this journey through ancient China has moved, educated, or inspired you, I encourage you to continue exploring. Read the ancient texts, the Analects of Confucius, the Tao Te Ching, the Shiji of Sima Qian. Visit museums to see Chinese artifacts firsthand. Travel to China if you can, to walk the Great Wall, explore the Forbidden City, see the terracotta warriors. And most importantly, take the lessons of ancient China into your own life and world. Ask yourself, what do I want to preserve? What needs to change? How can I contribute to leaving something valuable for future generations? How can I avoid the mistakes of those who came before while building on their achievements? Ancient China's story is not just Chinese history, it's human history. And human history is our story, all of us, regardless of where we come from or where we're going. By understanding where we've been, we better understand where we are and where we might go. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 4,000 years. If you've made it this far into our exploration, you've demonstrated remarkable dedication to understanding one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Please subscribe if you haven't already, like this video if it added value to your understanding, and comment with your thoughts. Which dynasty or invention surprised you most? What mysteries do you hope will be solved in your lifetime? What lessons from ancient China seem most relevant to our modern world? Share this video with anyone who loves history, who's curious about China, or who appreciates deep explorations of human civilization. Content like this takes enormous research and production effort, and your support, through views, likes, subscriptions, and shares, makes it possible to create more. From the Neolithic villages to the last emperor's abdication, from bronze vessels to treasure ships, from the first emperor's terracotta army to the mysteries that remain unsolved, ancient China's story is one of humanity's greatest epics. And like all truly great stories, it continues to resonate, to teach, and to inspire. Until our next journey into history, remember, we stand on the shoulders of countless generations who built, struggled, created, and dreamed. Their legacy is our inheritance. What we do with it is our legacy to the future. Credits: narration by Chris for Veils of Eternity. Editing by Evangel. Script research and writing by Solomon. Drawing on sources including Sima Qian's Shiji, Records of the Grand Historian, Bangu's Hanshu, Book of Han, archaeological reports from Anyang, Erlatu Terracotta Army excavations, scholarly works by Joseph Needham, Jacques Jernot, John King Fairbank, Patricia Buckley Ebry, Mark Edward Lewis, and others. Current research from journals including Early China, Tung Pao, and others. Special acknowledgement of the archaeologists, historians, and scholars whose lifework makes understanding ancient China possible. This documentary presents current scholarly consensus where it exists and identifies areas of ongoing debate where interpretations differ. Ancient history is continually revised as new evidence emerges. For viewers interested in further exploration, recommended readings include The Early Chinese Empires by Mark Edward Lewis, China, A New History by John King Fairbank, A History of Chinese Civilization by Jacques Jernot, The Cambridge History of Ancient China, edited by Michael Lowy and Edward Shaughnessy, Science and Civilization in China, by Joseph Needham, multi-volume work. Thank you for watching. May history illuminate your present and inspire your future.